Chapter 660. Nanming Shang turned around and looked at the nether race's prodigy again. His eyes were burning with an extreme light, a kind of sacredness that made people tremble. This was faith, this was madness, this was a kind of affirmation, a supreme affirmation. And we believe, we firmly believe, the Emperor will definitely be the final victor of this era, the ultimate existence that will ascend to the peerless throne. The Emperor Dao Domain appeared for the sake of the Emperor. The nether race's prodigy wanted to mock, but when he saw the madness in Nanming Shang's eyes, he fell silent, completely silent. How could he not notice such an expression? This was a manifestation of faith to the extreme. He couldn't understand how Lu Feng, who was also of the younger generation, could at most be the idol of the human race's younger generation. How could Lu Feng become an existence of faith? Nanming Shang looked at the nether race's prodigy and finally returned to normal. He smiled and said slowly, "How about this? I'll make a bet with you." The nether race's prodigy was taken aback. He looked at Nanming Shang in disbelief. In the past, or even just now, whenever they met in the ruins, the human race and the nether race would fight to the death. Unless one side died, it wouldn't stop. But now, Nanming Shang wanted to make a bet with him even though he was sure to win. Soon, the nether race's prodigy regained his composure and looked at Nanming Shang. "What right do I have to say anything now? Since you want to bet, then let's bet." Nanming Shang nodded his head gently. "Then this time, we'll use the Emperor as the stake. If he can't pass all the tests and condense the embryonic form of the ultimate invincible battle physique, then I'll let you go. How about?" This was a chance to live. This was his only chance to live. How could he give up? Nodding, the nether race's prodigy looked at Nanming Shang. He wanted to say something but didn't. In the end, he fell silent. In the endless void, the 9 heavenly stars phenomenon was so terrifying and extreme that it could sever the stars and time, shatter the world's space-time. In the past, Lu Feng had once condensed a star anomaly and added it to his body, finally forming the star-great demon body. However, what appeared at that time were only endless stars, fragments of the 9 heaven stars. Compared to the 9 heavenly stars, the power and strength of the endless stars were simply incalculable. Therefore, at this moment, the endless stars were the true ultimate disaster for Lu Feng. Time slowly passed. However, the calamity in the sky didn't descend. It just floated quietly in the air without the slightest fluctuation. Eventually, more and more existences were puzzled. They didn't understand, but they weren't too confused. The great calamity of the 9 heaven stars was truly an apocalyptic calamity. It was one of the ultimate powers of the great calamity of the universe. No one had ever seen its power when it descended. Everything that was known about it was passed down in legends. All the existences who had witnessed all of this eventually perished and died. Therefore, no one knew what the great calamity of the 9 heaven stars was all about. Gradually, a long, long time passed. An entire day had passed since the great calamity of the Supreme War Body began. Lu Feng basically completed the first 3 calamities in less than an hour. However, the last great calamity of the 9 heaven stars had indeed gone on for such a long time, but there was still no change. Finally, this caused countless existences to gradually become irritated. However, this situation did not last for long because not long after, the phenomenon of the 9 heavenly stars in the sky began to slowly surge. "I see it. I finally understand." It turns out that after waiting for so long, this calamity is accumulating power. It's actually condensing everything, accumulating power, to give the only blow, to give the most powerful blow. "Emperor, let's see how you're going to run this time." The first 3 calamities had continuously descended, and the power of power had continuously increased. However, this calamity seemed to have caused the entire 9 heaven stars to surge, as if all of them were about to descend together. This proved one thing: and that was that the final tribulation would be completed with a single strike. Obviously, this kind of calamity was the most terrifying and the most difficult to resist. Gestation, endless gestation. Vaguely, there seemed to be a shocking power turbulence, causing the entire spacetime to tremble in a terrifying manner. Countless cracks in the spacetime began to appear, connecting the entire sky and crossing the entire spacetime. All living beings were terrified, and they were unrestrained. No one had thought that a mere phenomenon, a mere accumulation of power, could produce such a shocking scene. Obviously, they had thought of the terrifying scene after the calamity descended. Emperor, this time, you're finished. Many existences of the netherworld were roaring, trembling, and roaring. This was a kind of trembling of excitement. Such a calamity, not to mention Lu Feng, who was only at the perfect stage or who had become a demigod now. Even a true god would instantly perish in the face of this calamity. In their hearts, Lu Feng would undoubtedly die. At this moment, even the existences of the human race revealed a trace of worry. Although they firmly believed that Lu Feng would succeed in the end, they still couldn't help but feel worried when they saw this scene. After all, such a calamity could be said to be the end of the world. In the end, the calamity still descended. Endless 9 heaven stars appeared in the void, but when they appeared in the gloomy sky of eternal death, they didn't immediately descend. Under the doubtful gaze of many existences, these 9 heaven stars that could destroy the world actually began to transform. In the next moment, an incomparably ferocious and terrifying giant beast was born. Savage Lord. That's actually the projection of the Savage Lord. It's world-shaking, world-shaking. These 9 heaven stars are actually condensing an endless amount of power, transforming into the appearance of the Savage Lord, and starting this ultimate attack. According to the legends, the Wildlands Lord was a descendant of one of the 3 supreme beast kings of the primordial behemoth during the Immortal and Devil era. It had an extremely rich bloodline of the immortal great beast. At its peak, it could easily suppress any overlord of an era. At this moment, the 9 heavens stars actually fused on their own to form this incomparably ferocious and terrifying beast king. This made many existences really shocked to the extreme. When an ordinary calamity takes the form of such a terrifying beast, it will increase the power of the immortal's power by hundreds or thousands of times, enough to truly destroy the world. Is the monarch battle physique really the most terrifying battle physique in the history of the universe? He actually triggered a calamity and took on such an invincible form. Everyone exclaimed in shock and horror. However, the calamity's arrival didn't end with their shock and exclamations. Because it came, it raised its head and roared, as if it could destroy an era. The ferocious beast's head was enough to become the nightmare of any existence for the rest of their lives. As it gently descended, it carried with it an eternal might that could destroy everything. It caused the entire world to be annihilated. Countless 9 heavenly stars gathered together. Finally, the complete nurturing of power caused the might of the 9 heavenly stars' calamity to reach the limit of its illusory form. Under such a calamity, perhaps even the most powerful true god would be annihilated for eternity and disappear completely. As for Lu Feng, although he was terrifying, no one was optimistic about him at this moment. At the moment when the most terrifying pressure descended, Lu Feng opened his eyes for the first time. No one could see the expression in Lu Feng's eyes. It was an indescribable expression, a kind of extreme calmness, as if even billions of existences couldn't shake him in the slightest. He stood up gently, and the power that lingered around his body instantly returned to his body. At this moment, Lu Feng's body flickered with endless gorgeous colors. Although it was extremely transparent, that kind of brilliance was indescribably gorgeous. His head finally rose slowly. That kind of expression didn't change at all, as if he didn't care about everything in front of him at all. Finally, when the Savage Lord's vision descended, Lu Feng smiled. Invincible power requires an invincible battle body. If I lose the support of this invincible battle body, even if I destroy everything, I will also die, and I will be annihilated for eternity. So, roar. Lu Feng had invincible power. Once he activated all of his supreme power, once he used the supreme technique, his power would be infinitely terrifying. When he used the era of emperors, or even the 1 billion mortal dust, 1 billion immortals, his power would far exceed his own limit. But at the same time, once he used these invincible means, his body would suffer the most terrible obliteration, almost to a state of decay. Therefore, Lu Feng had to condense an invincible battle body, the ultimate battle body that could bear his invincible power. And this time, it was the best opportunity. Looking at the Wildlands Lord, Lu Feng made his move. He didn't choose to defend passively, nor did he choose to be passive, because he was the emperor. He was the only emperor of truth since ancient times. As the great emperor of truth, how could he let others kill him? How could he passively bear it? What he wanted was to control. In his era, he was the greatest existence. Therefore, Lu Feng chose to kill. In front of the horrified eyes of the Netherworld race and the human race, Lu Feng's tiny body turned into the invincible shadow of the great emperor. He merged with the shadow of the great emperor, and he actually charged towards the endless void alone. The emperor is crazy. This was the only thought in everyone's mind. Chapter 661. The monarch had gone mad. The monarch had truly gone mad. If he hadn't gone mad, how could he have done such a crazy thing? Facing the great calamity alone, he didn't choose to defend himself. Instead, he chose to kill. If this wasn't madness, then what was? The collision instantly created the projection of the great emperor. Indeed, it was possible that it would become the number one phenomenon since ancient times, the greatest figure in all of history. However, it was still in its embryonic form. Lu Feng had yet to reach the realm of great success. Thus, it was impossible for it to reach its peak state. It was also impossible for it to become the strongest manifestation since ancient times. However, the calamity it was facing was truly the most terrifying calamity phenomenon. It was indescribably terrifying. Therefore, it collapsed the moment it collided. The ferocious savage lord tore apart the monarch's body. It tore apart the monarch's robe and broke the monarch's crown. It was only a projection, an embryonic form of the great emperor's projection. It was impossible for it to collide with that terrifying calamity. It couldn't resist at all. Just like that, Lu Feng's body was exposed to the ferocious beast king. His body was so small, but his opponent seemed to be the entire sky. This was a completely disproportionate confrontation. However, Lu Feng didn't show the slightest trace of fear. He just stood there quietly. It was as if the great emperor's manifestation that was being torn apart had nothing to do with him. At the final moment, the savage lord descended. Its terrifying claws were about to tear Lu Feng apart. It wanted to completely crush Lu Feng. At this moment, Lu Feng still didn't use any power. He was still so calm. It was so calm that it made people tremble. The beast claw that was bigger than 1,000,000 Lu Fengs finally arrived at Lu Feng's chest. As for Lu Feng, he was calm. He was extremely calm. He watched quietly. He was too calm and too calm. Countless existences exclaimed. Some were shocked, some were agitated, some were excited, some were sad, and some were sad. All of their emotions, regardless of whether they were good or bad, appeared at this moment. Finally, the sharp claw pierced through Lu Feng's body just like that. The sharp claws didn't tear Lu Feng to shreds as they had imagined. The entire beast claw was annihilated in front of Lu Feng's chest. It turned into a beam of light and continuously entered Lu Feng's body. Lu Feng's eyes were slightly distorted due to extreme pain. His entire body was trembling slowly. At the same time, countless forces shot out from every corner of Lu Feng's body. This power seemed to penetrate Lu Feng's body, wanting to tear him into countless pieces. Lu Feng's appearance was incomparably bleak and gloomy. This was a true kind of great pain. It was a pain that tore the whole body apart. His expression was distorted and his pupils were constantly dilating. However, if someone could see it, they would be able to clearly see that in the depths of Lu Feng's pupils, that scene was incomparably calm. Regardless of the turmoil of the world, regardless of the universe's obliteration, regardless of the pain, regardless of the collapse of the soul, Lu Feng's will still exist. It was incomparably firm and eternal as one. This was a kind of extreme state. At this moment, Lu Feng was in such an extremely terrifying state. Vaguely, countless transparent colors appeared. This was the blood in Lu Feng's body after he used the Star Great Demon body. This was the supreme blood that had fused with the power of the stars and contained the power of the stars. It was a pity that Lu Feng had fused with the endless stars, and the endless stars were only fragments of the 9 heaven stars. There was simply no comparison between the two. Therefore, although he was facing the 9 heaven stars and Lu Feng already possessed the power of the stars in Lu Feng's body was completely scattered the moment they collided. Half of the beast claw had already disappeared, but the savage lord still didn't stop. It didn't seem to care about any loss of power. It seemed like it wanted to rush its entire body into Lu Feng's body. Lu Feng's body was already trembling to an extreme extent. Every moment, there were billions of vibrations and countless amounts of blood flowed out. However, the strange thing was that the blood didn't disappear. After it was broken down into countless nothingness by this boundless power, it actually returned to the body once again. The blood was baptized and broken down, yet it returned again and merged into the body, causing the power in the body to continue to increase and sublimate. Many geniuses from the underworld race and the human race could already see Lu Feng's current state. At this moment, everyone's faces were filled with endless shock and madness. Even the human race was the same. They finally understood Lu Feng's plan. An emperor. He is really an emperor. He is really crazy. What he's thinking about now isn't how to get through this terrifying tribulation. Instead, he wants to use this extreme tribulation to refine his body. He wants to use these countless tribulations to refine his body. Anyone who faced a tribulation would always be on the defensive. Of course, some heaven-defying and terrifying existences would choose to defy the heavens and rely on their own supreme power to forcefully shatter these tribulations. Such existences were considered heaven-defying geniuses that wouldn't appear even once in 1,000 years. However, Lu Feng was even more extreme. He actually didn't use the slightest bit of power. He actually chose to use his own body to endure this endless tribulation. He just wanted to use everything he had to refine his strongest physical body. After every tribulation, a kind of power will inevitably be bestowed upon him, allowing his physical body to improve tremendously. However, the Emperor believes that this power is not enough. It is far from enough to enhance his own power. Therefore, he chose to use all of this power. Even if it is a tribulation, he wants to use it to temper his own body. This is too crazy. This was indeed too crazy. This was because no one had ever done something like this before. Therefore, when they saw this scene, they really couldn't hold back anymore. Lu Feng stood in the center of the endless tribulation. The power of the 9 heavenly stars turned into an endless and terrifying savage lord. Now, this savage lord was gradually disintegrating into endless power. This power wasn't something that could be absorbed, because it contained the existence of the 9 heavenly stars. And what the 9 heavenly stars represented was the supreme power of destruction that surpassed the pinnacle of power. The power of destruction could never be absorbed. Therefore, the endless power of destruction that entered Lu Feng's body was wantonly destroying everything. Lu Feng didn't take any defensive measures. It seemed like he didn't put up any defenses at all, allowing this endless power to destroy his entire existence at will. This was tyrannical. An endless and terrifying tyrannical power. His eyes were already completely distorted by the pain. However, in the deepest part of his eyes, there was still only one image of his true self. This scene was enough to make anyone tremble in fear. The sharp claws of the Savage Lord had already completely entered Lu Feng's body. The brilliance that filled the sky made everyone tremble. It was indescribably terrifying. At the moment, Lu Feng seemed to be completely penetrated by the endless brilliance. Most of his body was bathed in this destructive power. Although it looked beautiful, everyone understood the kind of pain that came with it. This was the most beautiful kind of pain. Many underworld race geniuses and human race geniuses took a deep breath when they saw this. In their opinion, Lu Feng would be annihilated and turned to ashes the moment that power entered his body. However, who would have thought that he would actually hold on for so long? Even after those massive claws had completely penetrated his body, he still hadn't completely collapsed and perished. The willpower of an emperor is indeed incomparably shocking. He didn't even tremble in the slightest in the face of this suffering. If the second trial was an excruciating pain of life and death, then this trial is a fate worse than death. What this requires isn't just a terrifying physical body, but also a persevering willpower. An emperor's aptitude is unparalleled, and his willpower is even more terrifying. These people finally understood why Lu Feng was able to reach such a level. If it had only been because of his great aptitude, then perhaps he would have become the #1 genius of the human race or even the #1 genius of the current era. However, he definitely wouldn't have been able to defeat a human king and become the #1 person in the same realm since time immemorial. Apart from his shocking talent, Lu Feng's willpower was the most terrifying thing in the world. Everything that had happened today was the best proof of this. Finally, the Savage Lord went completely crazy. His roar simply shook the heavens and caused billions of space-time spaces to start collapsing. He seemed to have understood Lu Feng's plan. Although it was only a phantom existence, once it condensed and took form, it would possess a portion of the original body's willpower projection. It was clear that this phantom, which was condensed from the endless stars of the 9 skies, had obtained a lot of the Savage Lord's imprints from space-time. Therefore, its anger was so obvious that it could be clearly felt by everyone. In the void, after the Savage Lord's extreme fury, he finally did something that shocked everyone. He actually charged towards Lu Feng's body just like that. He actually charged towards Lu Feng in the craziest manner possible. Previously, when the beast's claw had reached in, it had only been moving continuously. However, this time, it had entered in an instant. The Savage Lord instantly turned into an endless amount of power and actually entered Lu Feng's body all at once. Brilliance! Endless brilliance, destruction, brilliance. At this moment, the brilliance was already extremely dazzling, causing everyone to be slightly dazed. All their words were so involuntary. They had already sunk into this destructive brilliance and found it hard to maintain their self-confidence. A moment later, the underworld race's king of massacre finally woke up. His expression was one of fright and he was actually faintly trembling. As he looked at the endless brilliance in the distance, his expression was one of extreme fear. The legends are indeed true. According to the legends, the limit of destruction is the most beautiful moment. This moment is the eternal brilliance. Once one is immersed in this eternal brilliance, any existence will be annihilated and assimilated by this destructive force, completely turning into nothingness. As if to prove his words, the places where Lu Feng was transcending the tribulation were constantly emitting rays of brilliance. When he saw this, the underworld race's king of massacre's heart trembled even more. He knew that these were all existences that had been assimilated by the destructive force. They had really lost everything. They had turned into destructive force and were completely annihilated. His face was covered in cold sweat and filled with fear. Unfortunately, this scene didn't last long, because in the next moment, he had also sunk into a state of confusion. Chapter 662. Nanming Shang looked at the figure in front of him that gradually faded and eventually turned into nothingness. It was hard to describe the fear in his heart. He knew that the so-called bet no longer mattered, because no matter who won or lost, this nether race genius was dead. In the end, he was assimilated into the endless destruction and turned into ashes. He was completely annihilated. Nanming Shang turned around. Although he was still terrified, he still looked at the center of the infinite brilliance with difficulty. It was the center of all the beauty and destruction. He knew that the reason he could survive was not because his will was strong enough, nor because he was heaven-defying. After all, he was just a genius. He could not even be considered a monstrous genius. However, a genius of the underworld race who was at the same level as him was annihilated. In the end, he turned into light and was assimilated into the destruction. The reason for all of this was because of the figure in the endless destruction in front of him. The figure that carried the hopes of billions of people. If he didn't have a connection with Lu Feng, if he didn't attach all of his will to Lu Feng, if he didn't go to the battlefield in the cosmic void to pray for him, this time, he definitely would not have received the feedback of Lu Feng's will. He definitely would not have woken up in this eternal brilliance and avoided the fate of being assimilated. Emperor! This is an emperor! Not only him, but all the human race geniuses and monstrous geniuses who were watching here did not perish. They had all witnessed Lu Feng's Saint Remains battle, and were part of the younger generation who viewed Lu Feng as their faith. Therefore, they finally received the feedback of Lu Feng and received the protection of Lu Feng's will. In the end, they escaped the fate of being annihilated. What they experienced just now was not the danger this time, but the most profound feeling they had for those who had narrowly escaped death was not the danger this time. It was because Lu Feng's existence was really too difficult to measure. Is that the will of an emperor? Is that the existence of an emperor? No wonder he could create such a shocking Saint Remains. No wonder he could become the endless number one. Is such a will that a mere peak-perfect stage expert can possess. Countless people saw it at the very last moment. They saw the center of their beliefs, the pinnacle of their beliefs, the supreme posture that transcended all the greatness of the past and the present. In front of Lu Feng's will, they felt that their own wills were like ants. That kind of unparalleled will terrified them, and they found it hard to believe. It was also because of this that they finally understood why Lu Feng was able to maintain his nature under such a terrifying karmic fire calamity. He was still able to forcefully overcome the calamity without severing any connections. When they looked at the endless brilliance again, many of the human beings no longer had the same doubtful expression as before. They were filled with endless hope and had regained their endless perseverance. They believe, they firmly believe, they understand, they affirm. Lu Feng, the Emperor, will succeed. He would definitely create another miracle, be reborn from the ashes once more, and create eternal glory. Pain. This was an indescribable and extreme pain. However, Lu Feng was still the same as before. He was still persevering. His face was distorted, and his pupils were infinitely enlarged. Endless brilliance appeared from every part of his body, filling every tiny unit in his body. At this moment, even Lu Feng's pupils were shrouded in endless brilliance. Originally, this was already certain death. After all, wherever the brilliance existed, everything would be decomposed into nothingness. However, the reality was the same. Although Lu Feng was still Lu Feng and seemed to be a whole, his entire body was so hazy. At this moment, he had been decomposed into countless tiny units. At this moment, even his soul was the same. If it were any other existence, any existence below the gods, they would have already died. This was because even their souls had been decomposed into countless tiny existences by the calamity. However, Lu Feng was still not dead. This was because his will was still there. Back in the core area of the massacre abyss, he had faced countless life and death situations, but Lu Feng had never faded. He had always persisted in his own heart, truly wandering between life and death, struggling in the midst of oblivion. In the end, he had returned, even carrying the mark of life and death. In the end, he had comprehended the power of life and death, becoming an invincible existence who had comprehended 6 supreme powers. So now, this calamity that seemed certain to others was nothing in front of Lu Feng, who had comprehended life and death. Of course, this was nothing, and there was a limit. If Lu Feng's will could not persist, if he fainted like he had in the massacre abyss, then the power that controlled the smallest particles of his body and soul would disappear. At that moment, Lu Feng would truly become nothingness, becoming the same as those existences that had been assimilated into destruction and ultimately being annihilated. Therefore, he could only persevere. He could only persevere in this endless calamity. Many existences of the human race quietly looked at the sky, at the figure within the endless brilliance. They should not have been able to see anything through the endless destruction. However, for some reason, when they were awakened by Lu Feng's will, when they relied on Lu Feng's help to walk out of death again, they seemed to have become one with Lu Feng. They seemed to be able to sense Lu Feng's every move. These people were silent, their eyes trembling. They were moved, persevering, admiring, and believing. Nanming Shang was the one who had interacted with Lu Feng the most among these people. He also knew Lu Feng the best. Therefore, at this moment, his feelings were the deepest. Emperor, if you didn't want to use this calamity to temper your invincible body, then perhaps you would have already overcome this endless calamity and reached a new peak. But your ambition is too great. You chose an extreme that no one has ever chosen before. You chose a path that should not have existed in the first place. Therefore, you endured pain that has never been experienced before. However, Emperor, we believe in you. We believe that since you have made your choice, then you will definitely reach the end. Because you are our belief. You are Emperor Lu Feng. It seemed to confirm Nanming Shang's words, as if to prove that Lu Feng was the greatest existence in this era. The next moment, turbulence appeared. After endless trials and tribulations, the most brilliant moment had actually appeared. The particles, which were already the tiniest of particles, were broken down and destroyed once again. It seemed that this time, it would not be satisfied until Lu Feng was completely destroyed. This scene caused the hearts of countless people to twist once again. They knew that this was the final moment. Even the power of annihilation knew that this was the final moment. If he could overcome it, then Lu Feng would become invincible. Then, Lu Feng would really condense the most terrifying body in history. Everything was at the final moment. Lu Feng could no longer feel anything in his body. Even his soul had been completely broken down. Lu Feng had lost all feeling. However, in the deepest part of his body that was not broken down by the power of annihilation, in the center of his will, Lu Feng was still calm. Eternity as one, true self as one. This was Lu Feng's persistence. His persistence. Finally, he erupted. Lu Feng was no longer calm. Lu Feng's calmness had disappeared. Lu Feng finally erupted. In an instant, the tiniest particles began to disappear. They began to slowly condense and form a substance. They began to gather. Countless soul particles gathered and formed a complete soul body. That was Lu Feng, the true independent Lu Feng. In the next moment, countless wandering, illusory eyes began to flicker and real substance began to appear. The terrifying calmness in those eyes had disappeared. This was the final moment. If he succeeded, Lu Feng would enter a whole new realm. He would be able to crush any existence just by relying on his physical strength. It would be enough to bear his invincible power. Therefore, he was no longer calm. He wanted to go crazy. He wanted to use his craziness to erupt with his greatest power. Behind him, the illusory figure of the great emperor appeared again. Unlike before, the illusory figure of the great emperor seemed to be more substantial this time. However, it clearly carried an ethereal feeling, as if this real and illusory figure could disappear in the next moment. The face of the illusory figure of the great emperor, which had always been hazy, finally became clear. At this moment, countless humans could vaguely see a little bit more clearly. For many humans, the face was very blurry and they could not see anything at all. However, for Nanming Shang, who had witnessed all of Lu Feng's miraculous feats with his own eyes, he could see through the haze. An emperor! So, this is an emperor! You want to surpass the human monarch. You really want to surpass the human monarch. From the moment you condensed this illusory figure of the great emperor, you wanted to surpass the human monarch. Nanming Shang could vaguely sense that the existence of the illusory figure was actually Lu Feng. He had actually used himself as the prototype to condense the first great emperor avatar in history. Back then, after the human monarch became a deity, he relied on his amazing talent to condense the illusory figure of the human monarch using himself as the prototype. However, you did it when you were only a demigod. Surpass, this is surpassing again. This was a complete surpassing. It was a surpassing that could not be described in words. Lu Feng had completed the world-shaking miracle that only a human monarch could do at the deity level. This kind of surpassing left everyone speechless. Nanming Shang knew that Lu Feng had used himself as the prototype to condense this invincible incarnation in order to surpass the human monarch. Since ancient times, there had been many people who had used themselves as the prototype to condense an illusory figure. However, almost all of them had failed. This was because an incarnation using oneself as the prototype required an invincible willpower. This willpower could not be lacking in any way. It had to firmly believe that one was invincible. If one failed, the illusory figure would collapse, and one would lose the right to condense an illusory figure. In previous eras, there might have been people who succeeded. However, in this era, only one person had truly succeeded. That person was the human monarch. Apart from the human monarch, no one would dare to condense an incarnation like this because they did not believe that they could remain invincible forever. They knew that once they failed, they would fail completely. They would never have the right to peak at the peak. However, the human monarch did it. And now the emperor has done it too. He is already invincible. No matter who he faces, he will always be invincible. Therefore, his illusory figure is about to succeed. Once the illusory figure was successfully condensed, Lu Feng's terror would rise to another level. This time, the emperor has passed the unparalleled calamity. His physical body will reach an unimaginable level. The embryonic form of the number one combat body in history is definitely not something that can be casually said. Even the human monarch might not be able to compare. In addition to the formation of his invincible illusory figure, Nanming Shang really did not dare to imagine. The previous Lu Feng was already a kind of limit. He represented a kind of terrifying realm. No one could compare to him. In the same realm, there was no existence in the endless space-time that could compete with him. And now, after this even more extreme transformation, just how terrifying would Lu Feng become? Chapter 663. In the void, Lu Feng's head was completely formed. At the same time, the face of the great emperor's shadow behind him gradually became clearer. At this moment, everyone could see it clearly. They exclaimed, were shocked, and were seething with excitement. The great emperor's shadow had begun to condense. In the next moment, Lu Feng's mouth let out an earth-shattering sound that reverberated through the sky. As the sound reverberated, the condensing speed of Lu Feng's body continued to accelerate and continue. In the blink of an eye, the neck and body were formed. Arms appeared and legs flickered. At the last moment, the crystal-clear jade-like arms were born, and the bare feet were complete. Lu Feng had succeeded. After experiencing hundreds of millions of life and death situations and crossing countless tribulations, my will is immortal and my soul is eternal. This was Lu Feng. Endless tribulations couldn't defeat him. The most terrifying ordeal in history couldn't crush him. Lu Feng had finally done it. The tyrannical battle constitution was enough to bear all of his combat strength. It was enough for Lu Feng to wield his most powerful fists against any opponent. It was enough for him to madly use supreme techniques, the taboo of the universe, the ultimate invincible immortal technique that could destroy the entire universe, 1 billion mortal world, 1 billion immortals. This was a kind of harvest, an achievement, and an invincibility. At this moment, he could finally use all of his strength without any scruples. At this moment, the world was clear and peaceful. It was as if the apocalypse that had happened before was just a figment of everyone's imagination. However, everyone knew that it wasn't fake. It was the most real thing. This was because the figure flickering with eternal radiance in the sky was proof of the existence of all of this. In the end, Lu Feng had succeeded. He had truly succeeded. At this moment, he was standing quietly in the sky. Beside him, many existences of the human race began to fly over. In just a few minutes, more than 50 geniuses and monsters of the human race had arrived at Lu Feng's side. When they looked at Lu Feng, their eyes were filled with a strange light of worship. They knew that the current Lu Feng was terrifying, invincible and terrifying. His body had become a truly supreme and terrifying weapon. Perhaps it was not any weaker than those terrifying Grade 7 weapons. Looking at Lu Feng, Nanming Shang finally spoke. "Congratulations, young Master Lu. You have once again created a great miracle. When you walk out of the ruins, I'm afraid a shocking phenomenon will descend. After all, this time, not only have you become your original existence, you've even transcended 4 world-ending tribulations that have never been seen since ancient times. Due to the laws of this place, perhaps nothing will be displayed. However, once you return to the universe, there will definitely be a shocking phenomenon. I really want to see you right now. I want to see the moment when you cause a world-shaking phenomenon." Upon hearing Nanming Shang's words, countless people from the human tribe thought the same way. Their faces were filled with pride at the moment. Lu Feng's strength was the strength of the human tribe. Everyone understood that the day Lu Feng achieved great success, the day he ascended to the supreme throne, would be the day when the human race once again dominated the universe, dominating space-time. Therefore, when they saw Lu Feng's progress and how terrifying Lu Feng was, they did not feel any jealousy. Instead, they felt happy and carefree. Lu Feng nodded his head gently. As he looked at Nanming Shang and the many people from the human tribe, he smiled slowly. This was a truly incomparably happy smile. After all, his gains this time were too great. Space was really terrifying. These people would never understand how terrifying Lu Feng's harvest was this time. They would never be able to comprehend it. His demigod cultivation base had directly transcended the tribulation and reached the first-level demigod realm. His body had reached the peak of the divine transformation realm. His soul was just one step away from the divine transformation realm. In addition, Lu Feng's supreme combat body was his greatest gain. He had used the calamity of the stars in the 9 heavens to forcefully temper himself. He had completely destroyed his body and rebuilt it. It could be said that he had truly reached the pinnacle of the world. Just as these people had thought, although Lu Feng's physical body was still enhanced by 8 times, This enhancement had allowed him to enter a wonderful state because of this tempering and the great demon true body. Once he used all his power, his body, which was filled with destructive and demonic power, would be almost 9 times stronger than an ordinary person's body. Furthermore, in terms of strength, it would not be any weaker than a grade 7 weapon. It would almost be comparable to a grade 8 divine object that had not been tempered. One had to know that this kind of physical strength was something that ordinary supreme divine bodies couldn't compare to. It was far from comparable. It could be said that Lu Feng had not found a suitable weapon in the past. However, he did not need any weapons now. His physical body and his fists were the most terrifying and unparalleled divine weapons. The shackles of his bloodline had been shattered, his realm had been improved, and his physical body had been tempered. This had allowed his strength to increase once again. His combat strength had also become more terrifying and powerful among those of the same level. Lu Feng really had the strength to not fear anything. Furthermore, Lu Feng had also gained some benefit. That was the destructive power. This destructive power, which had already surpassed the peak of the supreme power, was definitely a supreme power that was close to or even comparable to the great demon true body and the emperor power. Although he hadn't fully comprehended it, he had engraved the mark of the power of destruction into his body and soul because of this tempering. Given some time, Lu Feng would be able to comprehend the 7th supreme power. With the 7 supreme powers and the newly formed invincible battle body, Lu Feng's combat strength among those of the same level was truly peerless and shocking. It would make the entire universe look askance. However, when he thought about these improvements and the shattering of these shackles, Lu Feng's eyes became slightly hazy. Everything was perfect and unparalleled. However, there was still a slight limitation. It was this limitation that prevented him from breaking through and condensing a supreme divine body at the demigod realm. This made him dissatisfied. Nanming Shang looked at Lu Feng and hesitated for a moment before asking, "Young Master Lu, I wonder how strong your combat strength is now. In the past, he had always addressed Lu Feng as Young Master Lu. However, after seeing so much, Nanming Shang had already regarded Lu Feng as a complete believer. He could only use a devout attitude to respect his believer. He could no longer address him as Young Master Lu. Upon hearing this, Lu Feng fell silent for a moment. He was calculating his own combat strength. After a short while, he finally spoke. "I have now entered the realm of peak first-tier demigod realm. In the past, I could only suppress a beginner true god if I used all my combat strength. Now, if I use all my combat strength, I might be able to suppress a mid-level true god. If my opponent is a high-level true god, then I might be able to put up a fight." Lu Feng had always been a monster at the peak of 7th-tier demigod realm. Therefore, once he used all his strength, he could only advance by 7 tiers at most. However, due to the existence of the supreme power, he was able to increase his combat strength to a terrifying degree after advancing 7 levels. According to normal calculations, Lu Feng should have raised his realm to that of a peak true god. However, he could defeat a mid-level true god. There was even a possibility that he could fight a high-level true god if he used all his combat strength. There was no doubt that he was the first person in history to do so. No one could compare to him. When they heard Lu Feng's words, although they had already guessed it, they were still shocked. He had just stepped into the demigod realm, but he had the strength to suppress a true god. This was something that even the human king had not been able to achieve. Lu Feng was really too terrifying. "Alright, let's move on. This time, I must enter the altar in the ruins." His eyes were filled with absolute confidence. Lu Feng knew that he had to enter the altar. Only by entering the altar would he have the time to raise his comprehension of the martial way to the peak and continue to refine his cultivation technique. Only then would he be able to increase his cultivation as a psyche master and comprehend the seventh power of destruction. Therefore, he had to go to the altar this time. When they heard Lu Feng's words, everyone nodded lightly. Young Master Lu, you should go first. With the 50 of us together, we are not afraid of any underworld tribe. If you stay with us, your speed will definitely decrease, so you should leave first. This was the area of natural disasters, so they could not move too fast. If Lu Feng waited for them, it would waste a lot of time. Now, they had a team of 50 people, and there were not many underworld tribe members left. Therefore, if they encountered a small group of underworld tribe members, they could easily annihilate them. They were not afraid at all. Since there was no danger, it would be better to let Lu Feng leave directly. That way, he would not waste his time. When he heard this, Lu Feng hesitated for a moment. Finally, he nodded lightly. In that case, I will wait for you to enter the altar. When Lu Feng left, he was going at full speed. At the same time, countless calamities appeared in the sky. This calamity was more terrifying than the previous one. However, in the face of these calamities, Lu Feng did not slow down in the slightest. At this moment, the power of the great astral demon was fully activated. In addition, Lu Feng's body, the embryonic form of the invincible battle body, was formed. He ignored all the calamities and advanced madly. At the sight of this, the 50-odd human beings sucked in a breath of cold air. Young Master Lu, how terrifying is his physical body! Chapter 664. Any calamity was completely illusory in front of Lu Feng. They couldn't stop Lu Feng's speed at all. At that moment, Lu Feng really felt how terrifying and powerful he was. Although this new terrifying battle constitution was only in its embryonic form, its power was indeed a bit outrageous. Even when compared to the true supreme divine body, it was still much, much more powerful. I'm afraid that a less talented sacred truth body might not be much stronger than my battle constitution. This was Lu Feng's confidence. He had really encountered a supreme divine body. Although Rong Yuanyu's supreme divine body was only average, it was still a genuine supreme divine body. Lu Feng felt that when he had an eightfold physical body, he had already been comparable to or even surpassed a supreme divine body. But when he had the star great demon body, it was a complete suppression. Now, after being tempered by endless destruction, his physical body had reached an indescribably terrifying level. Facing any supreme divine physique, it was a realm that could completely crush it. Therefore, Lu Feng really had the urge to fight against the sacred truth body. The existence of the sacred truth body was incomparably glorious in the entire universe. Looking at the endless time and space, almost all the people who could condense the sacred truth body were at least at the celestial god level. Condensing the sacred truth body meant that one's physical body was 9 times stronger. The sacred truth body was a terrifying existence that could pass on bloodlines and create a first-class family. Lu Feng, who had been able to collide with the sacred truth body, would definitely have been able to create a first-class family if it weren't for the existence of the universe imprint. Originally, I could have taken the opportunity to condense a supreme divine body. Unfortunately, the last shackle still exists. Who would have thought that the foundation of my glory, the power that increased my combat strength, would now become an obstacle to advancing to the supreme peak? There was a helpless bitterness at the corner of his mouth. Lu Feng had never thought that that kind of power would become the shackle for him to advance to the supreme peak. If he wanted to improve in the future and condense a supreme divine body, he would have to break that shackle. Thinking of this, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with determination. That's right. What I want is complete transcendence. Then, it can also disappear. When Lu Feng wanted to take advantage of the situation to condense a supreme divine body, he finally failed. The reason for his failure was because of the existence of the bloodline in his body. the existence with the densest bloodline in the human king realm. If he condensed a supreme divine body, then the divine body would always carry the imprint of the human king. This would also cause his supreme divine body to never surpass the limits of the human king divine body. This might not mean much to others. After all, the human king was the supreme ruler, the greatest existence in the endless space-time, the first king. Even if they did everything they could, they would not be able to surpass sovereign personages. However, this was unacceptable to Lu Fenglai. This was because what Lu Feng wanted to refine was the ultimate constitution, a supreme constitution that surpassed everything else. Sovereign personages were what he wanted to surpass, not what he wanted to pursue. Therefore, this bloodline had become the shackles that prevented him from advancing. The power of the bloodline. If I abandon the human king bloodline, then the power of the bloodline will disappear. Although I will lose a kind of supreme power, it is not much. After all, if I can comprehend the power of destruction in the altar, then I can be considered to have gained even more. The recovery ability and other things brought about by the human king bloodline are slightly inferior to my newly condensed supreme divine body. Therefore, in short, even if I abandon the human king bloodline, my strength will not decline in the slightest. There was a scorching radiance in his eyes. Lu Feng knew that he would not decline. He would only become stronger. Just you wait. One day I will completely surpass my ancestor. I am destined to be the greatest supreme emperor in the endless space-time. When he released his speed, it almost reached a terrifying level. Lu Feng ignored any tribulations, broke through layers of obstacles, and flew straight ahead. Finally, the area that belonged to the natural disaster disappeared completely behind Lu Feng. There were 3 kinds of tribulations in the ruins. They were natural disasters, man-made disasters, and beast disasters. The natural disaster was already over. What was left was man-made disasters and beast disasters. Not long after Lu Feng flew out, he finally saw a figure. It was a terrifying figure that was brimming with a terrifying divine radiance. Lu Feng could sense that this was definitely an existence that was at least a 3rd-level demigod. Moreover, he was a monster from the underworld race. Of course, this was not some heaven-defying monster. He was just an ordinary genius in the Emperor Path domain who could only be called a young emperor in his own race. However, Lu Feng did not treat him as an ordinary 3rd-level demigod monster. This was because Lu Feng could sense a faint fluctuation coming from his body. This fluctuation seemed to be deliberately hidden. Although he tried his best to conceal it, he still could not completely conceal everything. Lu Feng knew that he was not the only one who had broken through during the natural disaster. Many people had also broken through and done it. Now, this monster from the underworld race had done so. If it had not been for the fact that he had just broken through, his hidden power would not have been revealed like this. The moment he saw him, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a cold light. The human race and the underworld race were natural enemies. Although Lu Feng had always been the kind of person who wouldn't offend others unless they offended him, he didn't want to hold back when facing the underworld race. Lu Feng knew that if these monsters and geniuses from the underworld race were allowed to grow, it would be the billions of lives of the human race that would die in the future. Lu Feng was the emperor of the human race. He had to think about the future of the human race. Therefore, in an instant, Lu Feng had already arrived in front of that figure. Emperor Lu Feng. When he saw Lu Feng, the monster from the underworld race did not seem frightened. He just stared at Lu Feng quietly. There was even a faint glow in his eyes. This was a burning desire to fight. Although he tried his best to hide it, he still managed to show it clearly. Lu Feng nodded his head gently. His eyes were also filled with undisguised iciness. When he had arrived, he had already judged everything. He had already determined that his opponent was dead. Seeing Lu Feng admit it, The underworld race's monster smiled faintly. He was too conceited. To be honest, I have just broken through and wanted to cause trouble for the human race. I never imagined that you would actually come knocking on my door. Lu Feng did not say anything. He had already understood. It seemed like this monster from the underworld race had the same idea as him. He had also planned to kill the geniuses and monsters of the human race after breaking through. This time, Lu Feng was even more determined to kill him. When he saw that Lu Feng did not say anything, the monster from the underworld race did not think much of it. Everyone says that Lu Feng has already surpassed the human monarch realm and become the true #1 monster in the endless space and time. Then I really want to see if you can defy the heavens and challenge a monster who is a whole level higher than you. I am a monster from the Imperial Dao domain. I am at the 4th level. Although you are a taboo monarch, you are only at the 7th level. My level is now 4 levels higher than yours. What will you use to fight me? Everyone already knew that Lu Feng was a peak perfect stage martialist. Furthermore, Lu Feng had only broken through a few months ago. The gap between the demigod stage and the perfect stage was the process of a mortal transforming into a deity. During this period, the difficulty of breaking through was much higher than usual. They did not believe that Lu Feng could become a demigod in such a short period of time. However, he had already broken through and was a whole level higher than Lu Feng. In addition, there was only a gap of 3 levels between them. At this moment, he was full of confidence. He wanted to suppress Lu Feng and seize Lu Feng's supreme fortune. In an instant, a terrifying will began to rise. An incomparably majestic power bloomed. In an instant, the entire space and time dimmed slightly. This was the power that belonged to the peak of the deities. Feeling this power, Lu Feng smiled. However, he did not make a move. Instead, he spoke. You seem to have forgotten something. The monster from the underworld race was slightly stunned. He looked at Lu Feng, puzzled. I am the Emperor. Previously, I created the Battle of the Divine Relic. My opponent was a true god. I suppressed a true god, but you only have the combat power of a peak deity. Is there any comparison between us? Hearing this, the monster from the underworld race was slightly stunned. A trace of gloominess appeared on his face. However, after a moment, he recovered and had a mocking look on his face. Yes, you may have defeated a true god, but who knows if the human race deliberately orchestrated this for the sake of your reputation? No one was willing to believe that Lu Feng could defeat a true god when he was at the perfect stage. Therefore, there was a rumor circulating in the universe that the previous divine relic was deliberately orchestrated by Lu Feng and the human race. All of this was to let Lu Feng complete the divine relic and become famous in space and time. Lu Feng shook his head gently and did not say anything more. He looked at the monster from the underworld race and finally raised his arm slowly. At this moment, the monster from the underworld race was also full of caution. Although he was confident that he had undergone a metamorphosis and might really have a chance to fight Lu Feng, he still needed to be cautious. A person's reputation was like the shadow of a tree. Lu Feng's reputation was too terrifying. Even though he believed that the existence of the divine relic had been orchestrated by Lu Feng and many other existences from the human race, the monster from the underworld race was still extremely nervous when he faced Lu Feng. Lu Feng looked at him and slowly raised his arm. Actually, I really disdain to make a move against a monster like you. It's just a pity that if you don't die in this era, the billions of living beings of the human race will die. I, Lu Feng, cannot allow such a situation to occur. I cannot watch the billions of living beings of the human race perish because I let them off today. Therefore, I made a move. Chapter 665. Boundless energy surged and fused with billions of profound mysteries. At this moment, Lu Feng displayed a supreme and terrifying might. He was even stronger than before. Feeling the terror lingering on Lu Feng's body, the Nether Tribe genius was truly frightened and shocked. You actually broke through. Broke through. Lu Feng had also broken through and entered the demigod realm. The Nether Tribe genius dared to challenge Lu Feng. The basic condition was that Lu Feng's actual level was still at the perfect peak stage. He also firmly believed that Lu Feng could not have broken through to the demigod realm in such a short time. However, the power in Lu Feng's body was telling him that he, Lu Feng, Emperor Lu Feng, had really broken through. A demigod realm Lu Feng, even if it was just a demigod realm first stage Lu Feng, was enough to frighten him. After all, if that was the case, the gap between him and Lu Feng was only 3 levels. If Lu Feng was just an ordinary monstrous genius of the epoch who had comprehended 2 types of supreme powers, he might not be so frightened by the difference of 3 levels. However, Lu Feng had once used facts to tell everyone that he, Lu Feng, could still suppress a monstrous genius even if he was 1 level lower. Thus, at this moment, the Nether Tribe's demonic genius was truly regretful and terrified. In front of him, Lu Feng's arm finally fell. Lu Feng did not use too much supreme power because his opponent was not qualified to do so. The moment his arm fell, the entire world felt empty. It was like a stagnation before a disaster. It was a premonition of an earth-shattering disaster. As expected, the next moment proved everything. In a trance, it seemed like the sky was about to collapse. What a terrifying supreme power! This is definitely the power of a peak god or a true god. Is it the Nether Tribe or the human tribe? Among those who entered this place, there are only a handful who can use such a powerful force. Who could it be this time? Countless existences who sensed the peerless power of annihilation were greatly shaken. They simply could not describe the horror they felt in their hearts. After a long time, the sky finally cleared up. At this moment, there was nothing in front of Lu Feng. What really existed was an empty world. Raising his hand and looking at his arm, Lu Feng was slightly dazed for a moment. After a moment, he smiled. It was a strange smile. I didn't expect my power to be so much stronger this time. Others might think that this was the power of a peak god, but Lu Feng, as a spellcaster, he knew that the attack just now was definitely the power of a true god level. Just now, it was just an ordinary strike, but it actually directly possessed the might of a true god. Without a doubt, even Lu Feng himself was shocked by this. That attack just now actually carried an unparalleled destructive force. Even the enhancement of my physical body has been raised to an extreme level. Is this my strength after the new transformation? Until now, he had not improved his understanding of the martial path, nor had he raised his cultivation method to the demigod level. Even so, he still had such a strong power. At this moment, Lu Feng completely understood that if he could really raise everything to the limit, even if he lost his bloodline power, he would not be any worse than a human king of this level. The next step is to raise my cultivation as a psychic to the same level. At that time, I will truly be the limit of a first-grade demigod. Finally, Lu Feng began to advance rapidly again. This time, Lu Feng did not stop at all. As long as he saw an obstacle along the way, he killed it. In just half a day, the number of demons and geniuses of the Netherworld tribe that died at his hands had reached 20. There were not many demons and geniuses of the Netherworld tribe that had entered this place. There were only 200 of them. After the heavy losses that he had suffered when he was going through the calamity, in addition to the conflict between the 2 races, and now Lu Feng had killed these demons and geniuses. At this moment, there were less than 100 demons and geniuses of the Netherworld tribe. There was no doubt that after so many relic openings, the Netherworld tribe this time was the saddest and most miserable. Soon, Lu Feng could vaguely sense a terrifying, ancient, and desolate aura. It was a kind of space-time mark that made him tremble indescribably. Such an existence was much stronger than any desolate aura he had ever felt before. Too much. Even the great wilderness totem could not give me such a feeling. The totem of the Great Desolation was once a 12th grade artifact. It was a terrifying existence that had almost stepped into the 13th grade. Although it had fallen because of the sacred steel, its existence was still shocking. But now, the aura emanating from the altar was even more terrifying than the great wilderness totem. This caused Lu Feng to be completely shaken. This is a sacred relic that belonged to the human Tao epoch. It was created by the immortal existences of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. Power is indeed shocking and terrifying. As Lu Feng grew stronger, his reverence for the universe and those existences of the past deepened. In his eyes, the Divine King was the Divine King. He represented a kind of terrifying fighting strength. But now, things were different. Lu Feng already had the fighting strength of a true god. With a wave of his hand, he could turn a huge planet into dust and nothingness. Even so, he was still just a true god. Above him, there were still celestial gods and the 10th level virtual king. The gap between them was incomparably huge. As for the god kings above them, how terrifying would they be? Who, no matter what, my future is destined to surpass everything. I want to become a supreme ruler. I want to become the pinnacle ruler of all supreme rulers. This is where my true goal lies. In the past, becoming a martialist had already been his dream. Now, after completing countless shocking transformations, becoming a martialist had become a thing of the past. Being a god had already become a thing of the past. What he wanted now was to break through to the ultimate realm that all living beings of billions of epochs looked up to. Lu Feng felt the desolate aura and moved again. His speed was incomparably shocking. However, this speed didn't last long. Because of the things that appeared before him, Lu Feng slowed down slightly. Lu Feng smiled helplessly as he looked at the black mass in front of him. Looks like I'm destined to be the unluckiest person on this trip to the ruins. The black mass in front of him, which seemed to cover the entire sky, was a demonic beast. This was the final obstacle to entering the altar. It was also considered the greatest obstacle by many existences of the Lu family, the beast disaster. Dark Night Spirit, I didn't expect that I would encounter such a thing. This demonic beast should be one of the most terrifying types of demonic beasts in the beast disaster. Looks like my luck is really heaven-defying. When he had walked the path back then, Lu Feng had forever lost the blessing of the universe's providence. Because of his choice, he had become a person that even the heavens were jealous of. It could be said that he was already lucky that endless calamities didn't appear every day to kill him. Therefore, encountering the most dangerous thing wasn't a big deal. The strength of a Dark Night Spirit should be around the 2nd or 3rd level of the demigod realm. If it was a single entity, it would be considered a terrifying existence among the demonic beasts in the ruins. However, the Dark Night Spirit is a demonic beast that lives in group. Every time they appear, there will be around 100 of them. However, this time I encountered, the Dark Night Spirit in front of him covered the entire sky. There were probably tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of them, let alone 100 of them. When hundreds of Dark Night Spirits worked together, even a god would be frightened. Now that the sky was filled with them, even a true god would have to retreat. After all, these demonic beasts weren't afraid of death. If their companions died, they would only become crazier. Looking at the countless Dark Night Spirits in front of him, Lu Feng even suspected that all the Dark Night Spirits in the ruins had come here. He took a deep breath. At this moment, Lu Feng's power of power started to slowly increase. When other people faced such a group of demonic beasts, they could only choose to take a detour or hide and wait for them to leave. After all, these demonic beasts didn't have any intelligence. It was very difficult for them to discover geniuses and monsters who were deliberately hiding. However, Lu Feng wasn't just any ordinary person. He was Emperor Lu Feng. If he retreated just because of this, then he wouldn't be Lu Feng. Therefore, in the next moment, Lu Feng moved. He directly charged towards the night spirits that filled the sky. Chaos, endless chaos. At this moment, the dark night spirits also discovered Lu Feng's existence. To them, anything that had life aura, unless it was an existence of their own race, was an enemy that needed to be eliminated. Therefore, countless dark night spirits were in chaos. They didn't have any order at all. They didn't stop at all and went completely crazy. At this moment, it was as if the sky was covered in darkness. It was filled with a terrifying, overbearing aura that made people tremble in fear. It was indescribable. At this moment, even if it were a true god facing this, he would most likely turn pale and give up on any thoughts of killing. However, although Lu Feng wasn't a true god, his strength was far from what a true god could compare to. At the next moment, with an inexplicable smile, Lu Feng slowly raised his arm. Behind him, the entire sky turned dark. This was a shocking phenomenon. It was as if an era was being destroyed and a space-time was being suppressed. Sky Destroyer. This was a brand new immortal technique that Lu Feng had created after fusing the greater heaven-level Qing Ming Tian and two other supreme immortal techniques. The power of power was many times more terrifying than the greater heaven-level Qing Ming Tian. Finally, the Sky Destroyer was completely formed. Although the cultivation of the Psyche Master was still at the peak of the King Psyche Master level, the power of the main body had already entered the peak of Demigod First Stage. Therefore, the power of the Sky Destroyer this time was actually unleashed by Lu Feng, who was close to the peak of Demigod First Stage. Previously, the Sky Destroyer unleashed by the peak of the King Psyche Master level was enough to suppress Rong Yuanyu, who had condensed a supreme divine body. Now that he was facing these ordinary demigod beasts, it was naturally easy for him to kill them. Of course, only Lu Feng had such an ability. After all, there was no special case like him. In the next moment, the Sky Destroyer was completely formed. Just as the Dark Night spirits were about to arrive, the Sky Destroyer suddenly disappeared. A strange look appeared in Lu Feng's eyes. However, the army of Dark Night spirits had already arrived. Lu Feng did not have time to think about anything else. Without the existence of the Sky Destroyer, the pressure he had to face at the moment was too much. A bloodthirsty look appeared in his eyes. It boiled and filled his entire pupils in an instant. Lu Feng already knew that this massacre was unavoidable. What he had to face was a real bloody battle. Therefore, he did not hold back anymore. A punch that shook the starry sky contained a huge amount of power. Just the moment of the collision set off a berserk wave. Lu Feng's attack cleared a small area in an instant. Among them, there were at least 300 Dark Night spirits that were turned into ashes. It was indeed terrifying to kill 300 demigods with one punch. However, sensing such an outcome, Lu Feng did not feel happy at all. Instead, a slightly dignified look appeared in his eyes. Looking at the Dark Night spirits in the distance who had already surrounded him and were becoming crazier, Lu Feng let out a sigh of relief. He could feel that these Dark Night spirits were different from those demigods. They were different from those giant beasts with spiritual intelligence that he had encountered before. They were really terrifying. Although they had lost their spiritual intelligence and did not have that strange change, they did not fear fear. However, because of this, they never knew fear. Instead, they became even more terrifying, causing others to fear them. Moreover, Lu Feng could clearly feel that in this place, the laws in the space were filled with a mysterious blessing. This had no effect on outsiders like them. However, to these demigods, it seemed to have a huge blessing. They were all beings that were born here. They were born to be compatible with all the laws and powers here. They were blessed by a great power. Lu Feng's attack just now, in the outside world, not to mention some demigods in the second or third stage of the demigod realm, even if they were real deities, Lu Feng would be able to kill them. However, in this place, he could only kill about 50 demigod. This was really hard to accept. Chapter 666. Lu Feng took a deep breath, and this time, the night spirits that filled the sky once again rushed towards him. The powerful power of power seemed to be tearing space and time apart. This was definitely a shocking scene, a scene that made people's hearts stop beating in fear. However, in the face of this, Lu Feng remained calm and silent. His eyes overflowed with bloodlust, but his body did not change in the slightest. Very well. Since there are no consequences for killing you, I will stay here and take a look at the power of my invincible combat body. In an instant, all traces of the existence of the supreme power disappeared. Lu Feng had given up on any enhancement of his combat strength. His realm started to decline in an instant. In an instant, he actually fell out of the deity realm and became a first-tier demigod. Such a scene was undoubtedly extremely shocking. It should be known that under the circumstances that the heavenly destruction could not be used, it would be extremely difficult for even a true god-level existence to face the endless dark night spirit. It might even be impossible. However, Lu Feng had actually chosen to disperse all his power and rely only on the strength of his physical body to forcibly resist. This was enough to be called an incomparably terrifying and indescribably crazy action. In the sky, a first-tier demigod power was really nothing. However, when he gave up everything and focused on killing with his physical body, Lu Feng's terror was completely reflected on another level. That figure. That's the Emperor. What's going on? How can the Emperor be so weak? Although these dark night spirits are terrifying and their numbers are unprecedented, given the Emperor's power, it should be very easy for him to create a gap for himself. But why is his power so weak at this moment? Many of the human race geniuses who had previously met Lu Feng in the Calamity Zone had gradually caught up. However, when they saw what was before them, they were filled with disbelief. The number of dark night spirits was indeed terrifying. There were hundreds and thousands of times more than what was recorded. However, dark night spirits were dark night spirit. They might be able to pose a threat to them, but they shouldn't be able to do any harm to the Emperor. After all, the Emperor was a level 1 demigod. His power could definitely suppress any beginner-level true god. With such combat power, it wouldn't be difficult for him to break through the blockade of the demigod-level dark night spirit. But now Lu Feng was in the middle of a battle, a crazy and hot-blooded battle. Under normal circumstances, other than when they were clashing with those world-shaking enemies, they would never appear. Moreover, these people also felt that Lu Feng's power seemed to have decreased a lot. His current combat strength was only equivalent to that of a peak demigod. This was a far cry from his peak. After hesitating for a moment, a monstrous genius of the human clan spoke up. "Should we go and help the Emperor?" Hearing this, everyone hesitated slightly. If it was someone else, they would definitely not help unless they were extremely close to them. After all, once they joined the battle, it meant that they would have to bear the killing of the Dark Night Spirit. Many of them were only comparable to a Dark Night Spirit. Once they joined the battle, they would definitely be annihilated. Naturally, they didn't want to get involved in such a dangerous situation. However, someone had already spoken up. Moreover, the person they wanted to help was the hope of the human clan. Just as everyone was hesitating, a voice suddenly rang in their ears. "You're right. You're right. You're right. There's no need for that. Let's just wait here peacefully." Hearing this voice, everyone focused their attention on it. However, when they saw the person who spoke, they all revealed a confused expression. The person who spoke was Beigong Tianxi. He was the young master of the Beigong family. Seeing Beigong Tianxi's appearance, Nanming Shang, who had just arrived, walked over. The two of them were opponents, enemies, peerless enemies. However, that was only when they were fighting. Normally, they would treat each other as confidants, friends who could read each other's minds. And now, because of Lu Feng, the relationship between the two of them had taken another step forward. Vaguely, the two major aristocratic families, Beigong and Nanming, began to interact with one another. Of course, they were only close to each other. These two great families knew about the relationship between the first-rate family, the Lu family, and the human king, the Lu family. They also knew that the young master of the first-rate family, the Lu family, was Lu Feng's follower. The two great families had never thought of challenging the Lu family's position. Seeing Beigong Tianxi's arrival, and hearing his words, Nanming Shang was slightly taken aback. After a moment, he asked, "Why?" Compared to Beigong Tianxi, Nanming Shang's relationship with Lu Feng wasn't very deep. Among those who could enter this place, there were only a few who were close to Lu Feng. Beigong Tianxi was one of them. Therefore, he must have his own reasons for saying this. Hearing Nanming Shang's words, Beigong Tianxi smiled slightly and turned to look at Lu Feng, who was in the void. At this moment, he had an inexplicable smile and shock on his face. "Didn't you guys notice?" "Noticed?" These people were slightly taken aback. Then, they started to pay attention to Lu Fenglai. However, as time passed, more and more people finally realized the real reason. Their faces were filled with fear and trembling. An emperor, he is an emperor! I'm afraid only he would dare to do such a thing." They had already realized that although Lu Feng's power was only at the pinnacle of the demigod realm, his true cultivation level was at the first tier of the demigod realm. He didn't use any support at all. Furthermore, these people saw it clearly. That was Lu Feng's battle. He relied on his physical body to kill his opponent. He didn't use any occult mysteries. He didn't even use any other powers. He relied on his physical strength to kill all his opponents. An emperor, this is too shocking and crazy. It seems like he just survived an unprecedented disaster. After condensing the supreme combat body, he wants to test the limits of his combat body. Speaking of which, although it's incomparably crazy, it's enough to make people tremble. However, this is also the most suitable. Everyone was silent, not saying a word. In the sky, Lu Feng was completely covered by the endless dark night spirit. Being in the center of the endless darkness and being attacked by countless second-tier and third-tier demigods, this feeling was enough to make one feel despair. At this moment, Lu Feng threw a punch and several dark night spirits disappeared. However, compared to the endless number of dark night spirits, this was nothing. However, Lu Feng didn't panic at all. The killing intent in his eyes was even more vigorous. His movements didn't slow down at all. The attacks of the demigods were so terrifying, but they couldn't hurt Lu Feng at all. At this moment, his physical body had inadvertently endured hundreds and thousands of attacks. However, other than his clothes being tattered, there were no traces of him. This was the terror of his supreme combat body. The punch across the sky exploded with terrifying power. At this moment, the true essence of destruction was wanton. Lu Feng's bloody eyes gradually showed an unconcealable excitement. This is the true essence of destruction. Originally, Lu Feng planned to wait until he entered the ancient altar before trying to comprehend the power of destruction, a supreme power that was comparable to the emperor power and the great demon power. However, it seemed like he didn't have to wait that long. Because now, Lu Feng felt that his use of the power of destruction had formed an indescribable sense of harmony. He, who had comprehended 6 supreme powers, naturally knew that this was a precursor to his impending comprehension. Therefore, Lu Feng became even crazier. The power of destruction itself is born from destruction. It's impossible to comprehend it by relying on quiet comprehension. Only endless destruction can make the power of destruction truly be controlled and comprehended. Lu Feng came to a realization. Even if he entered the altar and spent all his time, he would not be able to comprehend the power of destruction if he only meditated quietly. However, now, after experiencing a series of destruction, he gradually began to understand the true essence. Looking at the endless dark night spirits in front of him, Lu Feng's bloody and excited expression became even more intense. At first, he just wanted to test the power of his physical body. Who would have thought that he would be able to obtain such amazing benefits? Normally, there wouldn't be so many demigods for him to kill wantonly. After all, numbers were a problem. Even if there were so many of them, they would still run away. Therefore, this was probably the only time that he could kill and destroy as much as he did now. How terrifying is the Emperor's physical body! He is only a demigod now, and it seems like he hasn't condensed a supreme divine body yet. But how can his physical body be so terrifying to such an extreme degree? Many human race geniuses and monsters looked grave. They could clearly see that Lu Feng wasn't injured at all. Even though he had been attacked countless times, none of these attacks had been able to break through the defense of his physical body and hurt him in the slightest. This was simply inconceivable. The Emperor's physical body is really shocking. Back then, before going through that terrifying tribulation, he should have been comparable to an ordinary supreme divine body. Previously, he seemed to have completed some shocking transformation. The increase in his power is not weaker than any supreme divine body. After going through that unprecedented tribulation, his terror is even more obvious. Although the Emperor's physical body hasn't reached the level of a supreme divine body, in terms of terror, unless it's a supreme divine body with a heaven-defying bloodline, it can't be compared to the Emperor's. This was the conclusion that many existences saw and researched. This was the conclusion that they came to. However, they couldn't help but be shocked and tremble at their own conclusion. After all, a demigod with a supreme divine body comparable to a peak bloodline was too exaggerated. Coupled with the power of the Emperor's body, it's terrifying, really terrifying. Chapter 667. Punch after punch, Lu Feng had already entered a wonderful state. His exterior seemed to have been completely occupied by destruction. Every move he made was an interpretation of destruction. However, in the depths of Lu Feng's heart, there was an unusual tranquility. It was so tranquil that there were no ripples. The bloodthirst in his eyes gradually disappeared and was replaced by calmness. The killing intent became even more terrifying, but Lu Feng's expression became even calmer and more peaceful. It was as if this peerless destruction did not come from his hands. He was just a wise man watching from the sidelines. Finally, after countless killings, Lu Feng's arm suddenly stopped. At this moment, all the power around him completely disappeared. The will of destruction actually disappeared in an instant and turned into nothingness. He stood quietly in the sky. It was so strange. What was even stranger was that the countless dark night spirits around him did not attack. They just kept hovering in the air and surrounded Lu Feng, revealing their ferocious colors. However, they did not attack Lu Feng even once. This was a very strange scene, and many human beings naturally sensed it. They looked at each other, not understanding what was going on. They waited. This was a long wait. However, this wait did not last too long. This was because a shocking phenomenon appeared beside Lu Feng. Everyone's eyes widened in shock. They could clearly see that around Lu Feng's body and behind Lu Feng, there was a faint black light spot. Although it was incomparably dangerous, this darkness was too gloomy and could not be ignored at all. From the moment this black spot appeared, it kept expanding. In just a few blinks of an eye, it had expanded to the size of Lu Feng's body. At this moment, the crowd was completely shocked. That is actually black hole. The black spot that appeared behind Lu Feng eventually evolved into the most terrifying calamitous celestial body in the universe, Black Hole. At this moment, all the monsters and geniuses were inexplicably horrified. The existence of black holes was definitely a taboo in the universe. After all, only a king could truly come into contact with and resist a black hole. As for those ultimate black holes in the legends, only the supreme being of the universe, the peerless divine king, could contend against them and travel through them safely. It could be said that the existence of black holes was recognized as the most terrifying existence among all the disasters in the entire universe. But now Lu Feng had actually created such a thing behind him. This caused many of the monstrous geniuses to be completely shocked and at a loss. They stood quietly in front of the endless black hole. At this moment, the black hole had already expanded to a diameter of more than 1,000 meters. Lu Feng stretched out his arm and clenched it slightly. At this moment, the black hole finally stopped its terrifying evolution. There was an incomparably strange divine light in his eyes. Lu Feng had already sensed. So, this is the true essence of destruction. It can make everything disappear completely. So, this is the power of destruction. Lu Feng had really comprehended it. He had finally completely comprehended this power that was comparable to the power of the great demon. In this universe, it had already transcended everything. It was a supreme power that was above life and death. This supreme power was not represented by any other existence. As long as it appeared, everything would be annihilated. Everything would be annihilated. Everything would be annihilated. This was the true power of destruction. Turning around and looking behind him, Lu Feng's lips curled into an inexplicable smile. The limit of the power I can control now is this black hole. If I don't control it and let it grow wantonly, I'm afraid I'll be devoured. However, this is already considered not bad. The power of this black hole can be considered very strong. Although it can't be compared to the supreme killing power I wielded at my peak, it's still enough to suppress heaven and earth. I can feel that this black hole is not the limit of the power of destruction at all. What it will eventually evolve into is definitely not just a black hole. It has an even more terrifying scene. Lu Feng lowered his head gently and started to ponder slowly. Around him, countless dark night spirits continued to hover. They wanted to kill Lu Feng, but the existence of the black hole prevented them from approaching. These demonic beasts of the dark night spirit didn't have any intelligence, this was true. However, this did not mean that they did not have any instincts. In front of these absolutely terrifying celestial bodies, they were still filled with an instinctive fear. Just like that, an extremely strange scene appeared in the sky. Lu Feng lowered his head and pondered. Countless monsters continued to surround Lu Feng, not daring to attack. Finally, Lu Feng slowly raised his head. At this moment, there was a glimmer of light in his eyes. There was a trace of shock. Yes, I understand. The true limit of the power of destruction is actually not the existence of black holes. No matter how terrifying black holes are, they are still one of the celestial bodies in the universe. They can be considered the most terrifying disaster in the universe. However, they are still recognized and exist by the universe itself. Therefore, they are not the most frightening thing. The way I comprehended the power of destruction was through the baptism of the Great Era Calamity. Although the Great Era Calamity was a virtual projection, it really belonged to the Great Era Calamity. Therefore, the root of the power of destruction should be the Great Era Calamity. The true definition of the Great Era Calamity is actually the Great Era Calamity of the universe. Only the Great Era Calamity of the universe could be considered a Great Era Calamity. The others were nothing. Therefore, Lu Feng came to a sudden realization. He finally vaguely understood. The ultimate evolution of the power of destruction should be the Great Era Calamity of the universe. It was a great era calamity that could cause an incomparably glorious era to collapse unless a supreme ruler was born. Lu Feng even broke out in a cold sweat when he thought of this. The great era calamity of the universe was a terrifying existence. It was definitely a terrifying existence that could make an epic overlord turn pale and tremble in fear. As long as he comprehended the power of destruction to the extreme in the future, would he be able to evolve such a terrifying calamity? At that moment, Lu Feng's eyes glowed with a scorching light. He even thought of giving up on the other powers and focusing on studying the power of destruction. However, this thought quickly disappeared. This was because Lu Feng was not an irrational person. Just now, he had been stimulated by his own thoughts. He had been stimulated by everything that might happen. Perhaps my future can really evolve into such an extreme calamity that will make everything in the universe a thing of the past and end an epic. However, that is not the limit I am pursuing. What Lu Feng pursued had always been the true strongest and most supreme. Everything else was no longer in his interest. For this reason, he had even set out on the path and opened up the future when he was still weak. Therefore, the power of destruction that could make an epic go extinct was not the root of his pursuit. The great era calamity of the universe is really terrifying. It can make an epic overlord fall. However, it is nothing in front of a supreme ruler. A supreme ruler is an existence that can safely pass through the great era calamity of the universe. Therefore, the great era calamity of the universe is not the most powerful. Lu Feng already understood this point. What he pursued was the limit, to surpass the human king. The great era calamity of the universe was nothing in front of the human king. Therefore, giving up everything and focusing on comprehending the power of destruction was equivalent to walking into the wrong path. Lu Feng had also thought it through. If he only studied the power of destruction, then it was actually putting the cart before the horse. The power of destruction is powerful, but it is at most on par with the power of the great demon and the power of monarch. It is not comparable to the primitive, immortal power. Since it can have such power, then what about the power of the great demon and the power of monarchs? Then, what about the primitive, immortal power that is above these? Those are the foundation. Compared to the power of destruction, they represent the true limit. If I really focus on the power of destruction, then it will be a joke. With a faint smile, he finally dispelled all these unreliable thoughts. Lu Feng looked at the countless demon beasts that were flying around and seemed like they would kill Lu Feng in the next moment. Actually, I should thank you for your help. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have known the limits of my combat body, let alone truly comprehend the power of destruction. Unfortunately, I also understand that if I can't kill you, you won't let me pass. And I have a reason to go. So, all of you, disappear. He stretched out his arm, followed by the terrifying black hole with a diameter of over 1,000 meters behind him. Just like that, he sent it out gently under the gazes of the geniuses of the human race. The existence of the black hole was indeed worthy of being the universe's peak power of destruction. Although it was not as terrifying as the great era calamity of the universe, it was really enough for the present world. In an instant, the black hole brushed past him. Its speed was incomparably fast. It was also at this moment that everything along the way disappeared completely. Not even the slightest trace of it could be seen. It had completely disappeared. A path suddenly appeared in the terrifying sky that was shrouded in endless darkness. Countless dark night spirits still existed around the path, but none of them dared to take a step into the path. Lu Feng walked on the path quietly at a moderate speed. Behind him, the black hole was still quietly guarding him. Countless dark night spirits seemed to have realized something. They kept crying out but did not dare attack. They could only watch Lu Feng leave just like that. Many human race beings were silent. They could no longer say anything at the moment. After a long time, when they saw that Lu Feng's figure had completely disappeared, They finally took to the air slowly and flew in the direction of Lu Feng. These people all understood that there would be no more demon beasts along the way that Lu Feng would pass. The terrifying black hole behind Lu Feng was enough to make any demon beast retreat, not to mention the fact that he could exterminate them with a wave of his hand. The monarch is really terrifying. Now, even these fearless demon beasts don't dare to approach him. If we follow him, I reckon that we can reduce the number of deaths. The monstrous geniuses and geniuses of the human race gently nodded. However, they didn't slow down. They followed closely behind Lu Feng and flew into the distance. Chapter 668. Generally, it would take about 2 days to reach the altar after entering this place. Given Lu Feng's unbridled characteristics and speed, perhaps half a day would have been enough. Unfortunately, he had spent more than a day in the beginning, where the natural disasters were concentrated, in order to condense the strongest combat constitution and complete the breakthrough. In addition to the wasted resources, Lu Feng had already walked for nearly 2 days. Of course, this time couldn't be considered very long. However, this was still a little too long for Lu Feng. Lu Feng was able to see it from afar. He was finally able to see the altars from the ancient times. At this moment, Lu Feng stopped in his tracks. He floated quietly in the air, in an endless silence. After a long time, he finally let out a long sigh. There was an indescribable expression on his face. This is the third time, this was the third time. This was the third time Lu Feng had seen the altar. Although there were slight differences, and the steps were different, the overall shape and the embodiment of the molding were exactly the same. This altar was so similar to the one Lu Feng had seen on the Gufang star. It was almost exactly the same. The first time was on the Gufang star. The second time was in the realm of time. This is the third time. What exactly is this altar? Why did it choose the same shape in 3 different eras? There must be some kind of relationship between them. Lu Feng also had a lot of doubts about this altar. Unfortunately, he really didn't have a clue. When he had been in the human monarch's Lu family and the Federal University, he had also tried to study the origin of this altar. Unfortunately, even in the 2 ancient places of the human race, he hadn't been able to find any trace of this altar's existence. This made Lu Feng feel really helpless. It doesn't matter. Anyway, when I am strong enough one day, I will be able to trace back through time and space. Then, all the secrets will no longer be secrets. Having figured this out, Lu Feng was a little more relaxed. In the next moment, he flew directly towards the altar. The altar was simply too big. From the moment he saw the overall appearance of the altar, Lu Feng had been flying non-stop. However, after flying for more than an hour, he still hadn't reached the side of the altar. Although he wasn't flying at full speed, Lu Feng's speed was still terrifying. In just 1 hour, he had covered at least hundreds of thousands or even millions of miles. Finally, after nearly 2 hours, Lu Feng arrived at the foot of the altar. Looking at this ancient and majestic altar that seemed to be connected to the Yellow Springs, Lu Feng's heart was slightly shaken. Of course, the degree of shock was limited. After all, he had seen too many things. Although this altar was indeed terrifying, it was still lacking compared to many of the miracles he had seen before. Let's not talk about the distant ones. In my consciousness space, the existence of the sky-piercing Fudu is much more terrifying than this. Only 3 levels of the sky stupa had appeared, but they were already much more terrifying than these. This made Lu Feng even more puzzled. This ancient altar should belong to the 5 ancient altars condensed during the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors era of the human Tao era. Speaking of which, the first era after the immortal and devil era should be the human era. However, even in a terrifying era like the human Tao era, the greatest miracle is this terrifying altar. Although it is shocking and terrifying, it is far from being comparable to the sky-piercing Futu. In that case, is the sky-piercing Futu a shocking miracle that appeared during the immortal demon era? Lu Feng's heart was filled with endless mysteries, which made him feel very uncomfortable. Back then, he could just laugh it off. After all, back then, he simply wasn't qualified to explore all this. Now, as his strength gradually increased, he even had the power to suppress a true god. Now, he was qualified to see some things. Of course, Lu Feng also knew that this was all just a thought. He still didn't have the ability to really explore everything. Finally, as he pondered, Lu Feng walked to the edge of the altar. At the moment, there were many existences gathered around. With a glance, Lu Feng discovered that the number of monsters and geniuses from the two peak overlords had reached nearly 200. More than 150 of those geniuses and monsters had been lost since entering this place. This also meant that the number of people from the two great races who could make it here wouldn't exceed 350 at most. At the moment, 200 was more than half of the total. The atmosphere in this place wasn't very good. The atmosphere between the two sides was also very tense. Lu Feng vaguely sensed the aura of many killings. Among them, there was even the smell of death. As someone who had comprehended the power of death, he could naturally tell that the smell of death wasn't caused by the use of the power of death. It was left behind after the death of a living being. Lu Feng understood that there had probably been countless collisions previously. Many geniuses and monsters might have even fallen. The tense atmosphere was about to materialize. This was because everyone knew that the geniuses and monsters would basically all arrive in about 2 days. Hence, it was soon time for everyone to arrive. At the moment, many monsters and geniuses from the human tribe were standing quietly behind one person. It was the same for the underworld tribe. Both of their bodies were filled with mottled scars. All of this proved that they, or both of them, had fought with others before. Moreover, it was a terrifying battle. Otherwise, with their existence, they wouldn't be in such a sorry state. After all, the two of them were the strongest fighting power of the human tribe and the underworld tribe. On the underworld tribe's side, it was naturally the young underworld king. On the human tribe's side, it was the Eastwater Luo Emperor, or the current Luo king, Lu Luo. Lu Feng understood that no one would have thought that the human tribe had a true god fighting power other than Lu Feng. This fighting power was actually one of the 7 emperors of the younger generation, the Luo Emperor. After Lu Feng, Yu Rong, and the Desolate Emperor appeared, the 7 emperors of the younger generation of the human tribe had become a thing of the past. In the eyes of many, it was a joke. After all, among the 7 emperors of the younger generation, besides the extremely mysterious Demon Emperor, the other 2 were the Eastwater Luo Emperor and the West Earth Emperor Rong. The 2 of them were only at the Emperor of Massacre, which was a level 5 existence. But now, in the human race, not to mention other things, just in the Academy competition alone, 3 unexpected kings of slaughter had appeared. They were Qi Liang, Wan Yueming, and the Desolate Emperor. The brilliance of these 3 people far surpassed that of the 7 emperors of the human tribe. Therefore, in the eyes of many people, the era of the 7 emperors had passed and the time of the human tribe's young king had truly arrived. However, who would have thought that the Eastwater Luo Emperor, who had only been an emperor of Massacre, would actually become a king? He had become the Luo king of the Eastwater Luo Emperor, and his cultivation base had reached the peak of the demigod realm. This shocking turn of events was unimaginable. However, while this was a good thing for the human tribe, it was the saddest thing for the underworld tribe. Out of the 200 people in the group, the human tribe had 150 people, while the underworld tribe only had about 50. There was no doubt that the underworld tribe was at an absolute disadvantage. The young underworld king glared at Lu Luo with a ruthless and cold expression. His voice instantly spread across the land. Lu Luo, when you became one of the 7 emperors of the younger generation, I wasn't even a mid-grade warrior. However, I never regarded you as my opponent back then. In my eyes, the 7 emperors of the younger generation of the human tribe were just a joke. No one could deny this, and no one could say anything else about it. After all, the young underworld king's existence was a peak evildoer even in the boundless space and time. He was a supreme king, an evildoer that was even more terrifying than the Sky Dao Crown Prince and the 31st Prince. He was qualified to look down on the Emperor of Massacre. However, I never expected that the person who would stop me from obliterating everything would actually be you. You would actually be someone I don't even care about. What a pity. What a pity. I also know a little about the Liu family. I understand that if it weren't for Liu Feng's existence, I'm afraid you would also be a supreme king by now. With the power of death and the bloodline power of the human monarch Liu family, these 2 peak supreme powers would definitely make you one of the few people who stood at the pinnacle of the younger generation of the universe. What a pity! What a pity! Hearing this, many existences of the underworld race revealed a strange expression. However, they didn't say anything because the current situation wasn't something they could casually say. Hearing this, Lu Luo only smiled gently and looked at the young underworld king with some ridicule. He slowly said, "Our Liu family is different from other aristocratic families. They might even fight to the death for some trivial matters. However, such a situation would never happen in our Liu family." Hearing this, the one who felt the most awkward wasn't the young underworld king or the people of the underworld race. Instead, it was Yuyo Ronghua who was standing behind Lu Luo. In the bloodline of the Yuyo Emperor, Yuyo Qingran's bloodline power was eventually concentrated on him. This made another Heaven's pride of the Yuyo family very unhappy. He even did some impulsive things after Lu Feng arrived. Of course, the end result was that the Heaven's pride of the Yuyo family was suppressed for 10,000 years. Although this matter had already passed, he still felt a little awkward talking about it. Of course, Yuyo Ronghua only felt a little awkward. After all, this kind of thing was very common in aristocratic families. Moreover, he also knew that Lu Luo didn't say this to target him. Hearing Lu Luo's words, the young underworld king only shrugged his shoulders slightly. "I'm just clarifying one thing. It's just a pity for you. Since you don't want to appreciate it, then it's not good for me to say anything. Although your strength is comparable to mine this time, and you've become the true #1 expert among the younger generation of the human race who entered this place, it won't last long. But I don't think this will last for long, because the moment I leave this place, I will definitely surpass you. At that time, Luo King of Dongshui, you'll definitely die." Everyone knew that the young underworld king's first appearance, his first peerless massacre, was ultimately ruined by Lu Luo, the king of massacre. As a supreme king, he was really unwilling to accept this. It was really difficult for him to accept this. If he was obstructed by Lu Feng, then he wouldn't be able to say anything. After all, Lu Feng was the taboo king. Although they were both supreme kings and monstrous geniuses of this era, strictly speaking, Lu Feng was much stronger than him. However, Lu Luo was different. Lu Luo was destined to be surpassed by him. Anyone who was going to be surpassed by him was like an ant. Now that he was being provoked by an ant, how could he remain calm? Therefore, he wanted Lu Luo to pay the price. And the price was death. Lu Luo smiled faintly. However, this smile was mixed with a kind of contempt that could be easily felt by anyone. "If you can't kill me now, then you won't have the chance to kill me in the future." Because Lu Feng said that the Nether race will definitely lose their current generation's young underworld king in this trip to the ruins. Hearing this, the young underworld king's expression was filled with endless gloominess. He looked at Lu Luo and no longer concealed his killing intent. Chapter 669. Lu Feng? Emperor Lu Feng? Indeed, he's a little terrifying. However, many things about him are exaggerated. That's all there is to his strength. The current him is only at the peak of perfect realm. I am already at the peak of second-layer demigod realm. What qualifications does he have to fight with me? A monstrous genius of second-layer demigod realm. Ordinary true gods were no match for him. As for Lu Feng, he had only suppressed a true god. Of course, in the eyes of many monstrous geniuses and geniuses of NetherClan, Lu Feng's so-called suppression was fake. It was just a boast from NetherClan. Although Lu Feng might be really terrifying as he was the Taboo King, there was still a gap between him and NetherClan. Therefore, NetherClan was confident that he would not fall into a disadvantageous position when facing Lu Feng. Everyone was quietly looking at Lu Luo and young Nether King. They could vaguely feel a terrifying and oppressive atmosphere. However, no one noticed his arrival. No one saw the trajectory of his movement. When everyone noticed his arrival, everything froze in an instant. A figure was sent flying backwards, breaking through the void and shaking the heaven and earth. Many monstrous geniuses of NetherClan and HumanClan were stunned when they saw the figure that was sent flying backwards. Then they were horrified. He stood quietly in the center of everything, quietly looking at the surroundings. He looked at everything, including the figure that was sent flying backward. No need for the future. Now you can die. His calm and tranquil figure looked at the figure that was sent flying backwards. He said those words calmly, but they made the hearts of millions and millions of people tremble. If I want to kill you, I can do it now. And now I have come to kill you. Emperor, he has broken through. Emperor has become even more terrifying. Lu Feng was even more terrifying. Everyone could easily feel the divine radiance lingering around him. They knew that Lu Feng had made a breakthrough. He had finally created a shocking miracle and completed the leap of invincibility. He had become a true demigod. When Lu Feng was at his peak, he had the strength to fight and even suppress the young Netherworld King. Now that he was even more terrifying, he naturally had the qualifications to say those words. Naturally, he had the qualifications to accomplish everything he said. Speechlessness, silence, fear. The many existences of the underworld race looked at Lu Feng. They could no longer describe their feelings at this moment. They all knew about Lu Feng and how decisive Lu Feng was in killing. These people naturally knew how shocking Lu Feng's decisiveness was. He wouldn't be afraid of your identity or background. As long as he was enraged, he would even dare to kill the young master of Dishi family. Naturally, these people all understood this. Moreover, they knew that Lu Feng's hatred towards the underworld race was even more terrifying. Therefore, once the young Netherworld King died, these people would be slaughtered by the Emperor and the human race. At this moment, the feeling of fear spread. Finally, the monstrous geniuses of the underworld race focused their eyes on the young Netherworld King. They hoped that the pride of the underworld race, the future Nether King, could protect them. At the last moment, under everyone's gaze, the young Netherworld King finally stood up slowly from the cracked ground. His face was filled with incomparable humiliation. Just a moment ago, he said that he didn't care about Lu Feng at all and even wanted to kill him. However, in the next moment, he suffered such a terrifying injury. This was simply a slap to his face. Of course, the thing that he couldn't accept the most was Lu Feng's appearance. He actually couldn't grasp it. This kind of strength had already proved that Lu Feng had the strength to crush him. He slowly walked over. Although there wasn't any injury on his body, he couldn't hide the heavy injury deep in his heart. He looked at Lu Feng with a crazy look in his eyes. As for Lu Feng, he still looked indifferent and calm. Although he was filled with killing intent, he still didn't have the slightest trace of complexity. Emperor, you actually broke through. When he spoke, there was no longer that kind of resentment like before. However, there was still a dense killing intent, which made people's hearts tremble. Lu Feng chuckled and nodded slowly. At this moment, he also restrained himself, as if he was talking to a good friend, quietly telling something. I felt that the time was right, so I broke through, Lu Feng said very indifferently, but the words that came out of his mouth made people feel uncomfortable. I felt that the time was right, and it was enough, so I naturally broke through. This was a sentence that made many monstrous geniuses tremble in fear. One should know that in order to break through, many monstrous geniuses had gone crazy. They had consumed all kinds of divine items, used all kinds of methods, and thought of many methods. However, in the end, all of them failed. It was very difficult for them to break through. Monstrous geniuses represented extreme talent and cultivation speed. However, this cultivation speed was built on hundreds and thousands of times more resources and a foundation of hardship, and it was only by relying on countless people that they finally managed to break through. However, when it came to Lu Feng, an existence that was countless times more terrifying than any monstrous geniuses and monstrous geniuses, it was so easy for them to break through. How could they endure this? Hearing this, even the young underworld king's face was slightly suffocated, and a slight distortion appeared on his face. However, this distortion disappeared very quickly. Emperor, you are indeed an emperor. Breaking through is really too easy for you. Lu Feng chuckled and nodded indifferently. His current appearance made him feel even more uncomfortable. I remember when I just entered this place, I said something. That is, the new young underworld king of the underworld race is destined to die in the hands of our human race. The previous young underworld king was a monstrous genius that appeared more than 600 years ago. However, at that time, the human race also had a monstrous genius, and that was Heavenly Goddess Jialan. Heavenly Goddess Jialan's existence was even more terrifying and extreme than the current young underworld king. In the end, before the real war between the two races, the young underworld king was chased by Heavenly Goddess Jialan across hundreds of galaxies and finally killed. That was the first time the young underworld king of the underworld race had fallen in the hands of a foreign race. That was also the beginning of the real disaster between the human race and the underworld race. Now, the new young underworld king of the underworld race had also appeared. However, this time it was even more extreme. At such a young age, he had actually comprehended 3 supreme powers. This was probably one of the few in the history of the underworld race. However, it was a pity that the glory of the underworld race could not continue. Because after the young underworld king appeared in the underworld race, an even more terrifying existence was born in the human race, Emperor Lu Feng. Where Emperor Lu Feng was, heaven and earth would submit to him. Previously, he had said that the young underworld king of the underworld race would fall in the hands of the human race again. In that case, he would have to fulfill his promise. He wanted the young underworld king of the underworld race to truly disappear into nothingness. Lu Feng's words were still so calm and indifferent. However, anyone who heard them would feel a chill from the bottom of their heart. They knew that Lu Feng was serious. Sure enough, the young underworld king's expression was very ugly at this moment. He could no longer pretend that nothing had happened and that he didn't care about anything. Looking at Lu Feng, the young underworld king took a deep breath and finally changed his expression to one of incomparable ruthlessness. Emperor, do you really think that you are the infinitely great divine king? Do you really think that you are a human monarch in the great success realm? You want to obliterate me at will? Can you? Although you have made a breakthrough, I, Galagalos, will always be the current young underworld king. I may not be a match for you, but I will definitely not be obliterated by you so easily. Young Netherworld King Galagalos was already a little crazy. With his current status and peerless aptitude, he was still in the top ranks in the endless galaxy and in the era where the Taboo King did not appear. In the previous era, Such aptitude was definitely the greatest possibility to compete for the Emperor's path. However, at this moment, in front of Lu Feng, who was even one level lower than him, he had become an existence that could be killed at will. How could the young underworld king be at ease? Therefore, he was enraged and he roared. Unfortunately, in the face of the young underworld king in such a state, Lu Feng just smiled indifferently. However, this smile did not last for too long, because in the next moment, Lu Feng's eyes became even colder. Gradually, a terrifying will lingered in Lu Feng's body. It was full of destruction and extreme power. The horror of the physical body actually caused the tremors that tore the void apart. Looking at this scene, the young underworld king's eyes flashed with a trace of horror. Supreme divine body? No, this is not a supreme divine body. There is no divine body origin in it. But why does this physical body give me a more terrifying feeling than those supreme divine bodies? It seems like it has the power of an ordinary truth divine body. How is this possible? It was undoubtedly a shocking thing to hear a supreme monarch of an epoch say that this was impossible. However, at this moment it really appeared. This was because Lu Feng's physical body was too shocking. It was extremely shocking. Lu Feng was indifferent and he chuckled. He was still the same as before. His physical body, other than the last barrier that could not be broken due to the shackles of the bloodline, had already become the most powerful physical body. Such a powerful physical body was incomparable among the existences of the same level in the endless eras. After all, his physical body had gone through 4 apocalyptic tribulations. At the last moment, Lu Feng had even used the true essence of destruction to refine it completely. Therefore, his physical body was definitely terrifyingly powerful beyond anyone's imagination. Of course, Lu Feng could not suppress the young underworld king with just the power of his physical body. After all, the young underworld king was a supreme king who had comprehended 3 supreme powers. Therefore, Lu Feng's power had further erupted. Chapter 670. The great sovereign's abnormal sign behind him finally appeared completely. As soon as it appeared, there was a great will that could swallow the heavens and earth and suppress the world. Such an existence gave people a feeling that they could not look up to it. They could only tremble and submit to it in worship. The great sovereign's incarnation, the strongest since the beginning of time. This was the complete incarnation of the great sovereign. There were countless abnormal signs accompanying it. There were countless immortals and devils worshipping it. There were billions of laws revolving around it. The face of the great sovereign's abnormal sign gradually became clear. The moment they saw the face of the great sovereign's abnormal sign, many existences sucked in cold air. An invincible incarnation condensed using oneself as the blueprint. Even the human king in the past only managed to complete it when he was at the peak of the demigod realm. An emperor has actually succeeded when he just stepped into the demigod realm. No wonder he has such boldness. He wants to suppress everything and surpass the human king. Everyone understood the significance of using oneself as the blueprint to condense a phenomenon. However, it was precisely because they understood that they were shocked to the extreme. This was definitely an unprecedented feat that could shock the whole world. Lu Feng had succeeded. This is still not enough. Do you think you can suppress me like this? Do you think you can kill me like this? This only proves that you have an invincible talent. However, it does not mean that you have the strength to kill me. Young Nether King had already gone crazy. The 2 things that Lu Feng had shown him were things that he wanted to possess even in his dreams. Unfortunately, he could not do it. He could not possess them. Therefore, he was jealous. That was why he went crazy. Lu Feng smiled. It was still a calm smile. At the next moment, his voice resounded again. Then, how about this? The moment his voice fell, Lu Feng became even more terrifying. The great devil energy appeared, spreading ferociously in all directions. The great sovereign energy appeared, shaking the starry sky. The primitive immortal energy appeared, spreading across the primal chaos. The power of bloodline surged, sweeping across the world. In the next moment, the power of life and the power of death were born at the same time, controlling the life and death of the world, making Lu Feng the master of life and death. However, just as everyone was shocked to the point of silence, another kind of unparalleled terrifying fluctuation was born again. Behind him, an extreme black dot faintly appeared, and in the next moment, this black dot began to spread, and in the blink of an eye, it actually formed a terrifying black hole that could devour the world and time of the world. The power of destruction. This is the true power of destruction. Countless people fell silent. Before entering this place, Lu Feng had only comprehended 6 supreme powers. And according to the Netherworld race's intelligence, Lu Feng had only comprehended 5 supreme powers. However, at this moment, Lu Feng displayed a total of 7 types. 7 types of supreme powers. There were even existences that surpassed the pinnacle of supreme power among them. The power of the great devil, the power of the primitive immortal, the power of the monarch, and now the power of destruction. Just 4 types of supreme powers were equivalent to 6 or even 7 types of ordinary supreme powers. In addition to the power of life and death and the power of bloodline, Lu Feng's power was equivalent to 10 ordinary supreme powers. 10 types of supreme powers. This is already the limit. This represents the limit of the era of War of the Kings. Legend has it that when the era of War of the Kings enters its final phase, the most heaven-defying existence born can comprehend 10 supreme powers. And now, the great sovereign has achieved it, silence, complete silence. Looking at Lu Feng, who was suspended in midair, with the reflection of the great sovereign, the protection of the great sovereign's vision, and the support of the black hole, these people really did not know what to say. They understood that the current great sovereign was really invincible. He had become the symbol of an era, the symbol of their technological era. Young Netherworld King was really desperate. He knew that Lu Feng was the taboo monarch, and the taboo monarch had the most heaven-defying power, which was the supreme divine ability. Lu Feng's supreme divine ability was praised by the immortal kings as the most heaven-defying supreme divine ability, twin souls. Regarding the twin souls, many existences of the various pinnacle overlords also knew that Lu Feng, who had unleashed the twin souls, had almost doubled or even multiplied his combat strength by several times. Such a terrifying power was even more impossible to resist. Therefore, he knew that Lu Feng was not lying when he said that he wanted to kill him. Looking at young Netherworld King, Lu Feng was still the same as before. He gently raised his arm, causing the laws of time and space to fluctuate with his will. How is it? Can I kill you now? I know that in your mind, you can enter this altar. In that case, even if my power increases by 100 million times, I still won't be able to threaten you. However, you can give it a try. Do you really have the chance to enter it, confident and domineering? This was what Lu Feng was displaying at this moment. He was confident that he could completely suppress young Netherworld King before he could enter the altar. What kind of terrifying strength was this? In the past, heavenly goddess Jialan chased the previous young Netherworld King across hundreds of galaxies before finally killing him. However, such a situation won't happen to me. If I want to suppress you, then you won't be able to escape. Young Netherworld King remained silent. The moment he sensed Lu Feng's terrifying power, he knew that Lu Feng was right. At this moment, the feeling that Lu Feng gave him was suppression. It was a kind of complete suppression in terms of spiritual will and strength. This made it impossible for him to resist at all. However, was he really willing to be suppressed like this? Was he really going to lose all hope in his life? No, he wouldn't. He was young Netherworld King. Although he wasn't a match for Lu Feng now, he was destined to become the Divine King in the future and become the Overlord of this era. How could he compromise like this? Therefore, he opened his mouth again. I admit that you have such strength. Under your power, I won't even be able to enter the altar. But, at this moment, a terrifying radiance appeared in young Netherworld King's eyes. However, I can make you regret it for the rest of your life. Lu Feng was slightly taken aback. He looked at young Netherworld King and revealed a mocking smile after a short while. Young Netherworld King, you want to use your supreme technique to kill the geniuses and monstrous geniuses of the human race, right? I have to say that you are really ruthless. Upon hearing Lu Feng's words, many monstrous geniuses of the human race took a step back abruptly. They looked at young Netherworld King with fear, as though they were really afraid that he would suddenly attack. Indeed, if young Netherworld King used his supreme technique, they wouldn't be able to withstand it. They wouldn't be able to withstand it at all. Among them, only Lu Luo Huang, Emperor Yuyo, Ronghua, and Wan Yueming would be safe. The others would be annihilated in an instant. However, when they saw Lu Feng's mocking smile, they regained their confidence once again. They believed in Lu Feng, just like when Lu Feng was deemed as a failure by many existences in the boundless starry sky. They firmly pinned their hopes and faith on Lu Feng. They firmly believed that the Emperor could protect everything. Sure enough, Lu Feng opened his mouth in the next moment. If you have such a terrifying thought, then I really admire you. However, can you succeed? Lu Feng was confident and determined, leaving no room for doubt. When you use your supreme technique, I will attack. I will attack instantly and use my supreme strength. At that time, no matter if it's you, young Netherworld King, or the monstrous geniuses of the Netherworld race behind you, they will all be annihilated in an instant. Do you believe? Many existences looked at each other in dismay. The first thing that came to their minds was the green firmament sky, the sky of destruction that appeared when Lu Feng completed the Saint Remains. However, in the next moment they stopped thinking about it because they knew that it was impossible. It was just the green firmament sky. Even if the heavenly destruction dome appeared, it was still impossible. After all, the young Netherworld King was still a supreme king in the second layer of the demigod realm. He was a young Netherworld King who had comprehended 3 supreme powers. How could he fail so easily? However, they did not doubt Lu Feng's words because Lu Feng's words represented his confidence. Since he said it, he would do it. He would really do it. At this moment, looking at Lu Feng in the sky, Lu Luo smiled. Because he already knew what Lu Feng was talking about. The era of emperors, vaguely, Lu Luo could still remember when they clashed. Lu Feng had used the supreme strength to annihilate his opponent. That was a strength that surpassed any other. It could evolve an era, dominate an era, and use everything in that era to annihilate his opponent. If it was really the era of emperors, then the young Netherworld King would not have any strength to fight back. However, the young Netherworld King smiled when he heard Lu Luo's words. It was a strange and crazy smile. He looked at Lu Feng and said slowly, "Emperor, your thinking is too simple. How could I be so stupid? I will make you regret it. If I don't kill all the monstrous geniuses of the human race who entered this place, how can I be at ease? You should know that when that time comes I will also die." Lu Feng frowned slightly. From the young Netherworld King's words, he heard some things that were out of his control. However, Lu Feng did not say anything. He looked at the young Netherworld King and waited for his explanation. I don't know if you know that the Netherworld race has a secret technique that can instantly increase one's strength. Of course, there is a limit to the increase in strength. In an instant, Lu Feng thought of the legend from back then. He remembered that the young Netherworld King was mysteriously transported to the Cymbidium system. When he appeared in the void turbulence, he seemed to have suffered endless injuries. However, by relying on the secret technique, he was able to instantly recover to his peak state without devouring much energy. This should be the secret technique that the young Netherworld King was talking about. Lu Feng nodded slightly. His expression became a little solemn. If the young Netherworld King activated both his souls and his combat strength reached its limit, Lu Feng would not be afraid even if the young Netherworld King used his full strength. Unfortunately, he could not do it. When he was facing those night spirits, when he planned to use the power of both his souls to activate the green netherworld sky, Lu Feng understood that it was impossible to activate both his souls in this place. Because at that moment, he felt a kind of limitation, a kind of terrifying seal. This caused his two souls, this supreme ability that belonged to him, to be completely sealed. It caused his Psyche Master's power to disappear completely. Therefore, he was unable to use the ultimate immortal technique of the 1 billion mortal world sky. However, although he was unable to use it, although he was worried, Lu Feng was still confident in his Emperor era. However, when the young Netherworld King said everything that happened next, Lu Feng finally gave up. He gave up the idea of killing the young Netherworld King. Chapter 671. Looking at Lu Feng, young Netherworld King laughed crazily. His smile made people tremble from the bottom of their hearts. In the end, when the smile disappeared, young Netherworld King's face was filled with a horrifying and ferocious color. Perhaps you know about the existence of that secret technique, but you don't know that the existence of that secret technique isn't just that. Its most terrifying power is that it can make me use all my life to complete a world-shaking attack. Perhaps you can display your world-shaking power to resist my invincible attack, but the power of our collision is endlessly terrifying. This is enough to transmit the information of this place out of the core circle of the ruins. Transmit out? From the core circle of the ruins? In an instant, Lu Feng seemed to have thought of something, and his expression changed slightly. Seeing Lu Feng's change, young Netherworld King laughed crazily. I think you should have already guessed it. You should all know that the place where we were transmitted to is the core area of the entire ruins. Other than this place, the entire ruins are infinitely vast. Although it can't be compared to the battlefield in the outer domain, it won't be much smaller. Other than this core area, there is still an endless and vast area outside. Those that live there aren't those demonic beasts that don't have any intelligence. Lu Feng finally understood young Netherworld King's plan. If he really wanted to kill young Netherworld King would go all out, regardless of the price, and choose to ascend to the final level to fight with him. In that case, this horrifying power would be transmitted out, and those truly terrifying demonic beasts living outside would sense it. Eventually, they would come here in an instant and kill all of them. This was young Netherworld King's plan. Emperor, perhaps you don't know. Of course, you can't be blamed for being ignorant. It can only be said that the history of your human race is too short. The number of times you entered here is limited, so what you know is also extremely limited. In the ruins, in the outer regions, there are countless terrifying demonic beasts living there. They are much more powerful than those demonic beasts in the outer domain. Although they would completely disappear after the end of every era due to the influence of the great calamity of the universe, they would still appear after the birth of a new era. Until now, the demonic beasts outside have not been weakened at all. They are surviving without any natural enemies. Moreover, those demonic beasts are all intelligent. After so many years of cultivation, with their intelligence, I don't need to say more about their strength. Lu Feng was silent. Indeed, this era had been born for countless years. And countless years of cultivation, even an ant would have transformed into an extremely terrifying existence. Naturally, these demonic beasts with spiritual intelligence would definitely be endlessly terrifying. They were definitely not something that the current him could resist. Looking at Lu Feng, young Netherworld monarch continued. Emperor, young Netherworld king, young's Netherworld king of the Netherworld kings, those demonic beasts are actually able to enter the altar and kill people here. Of the Netherworld king, Netherworld Netherworld. For those native demonic beasts, this place is a paradise. They don't have any restrictions. So, as long as those demonic beasts appear, all of you will definitely die. Lu Feng was silent. With the existence of the human race, the Netherworld race was also silent. They knew that this was an absolutely crazy idea. Because once they did that, they were afraid that all the existences of the Netherworld race would also die. If young Netherworld king did that, it would be equivalent to perishing together. He was planning to bury everyone here with him. Lu Feng didn't think for too long. Because he had already figured everything out. Then, consider yourself lucky this time. I hope that you will still have such an opportunity in the future. The moment his voice fell, Lu Feng had already turned around. For Lu Feng, a young Netherworld king was actually nothing. Now that he had surpassed young Netherworld king, it was even more impossible for young Netherworld king to be his opponent in the future. Young Netherworld king would only be his obstacle. Therefore, the biggest reason why he wanted to kill him was because he was afraid that young Netherworld king would slaughter countless existences of the human race in the future. However, it was obvious that he didn't have the chance this time. Since he had figured everything out, Lu Feng didn't want to hesitate anymore. Looking at Lu Feng's departing figure, many existences of the human race didn't hesitate either. In front of young Netherworld king, they didn't have any capital. Since Lu Feng couldn't succeed, they didn't have a chance either. Finally, the geniuses and monstrous existences of the human race began to enter the altar continuously. Many geniuses and monstrous existences of the Netherworld race had an indescribably complicated expression on their faces. In the past, they were so noble and great. Not to mention their heaven-defying aptitude, whether it was in their own race or other races, they all enjoyed a great status. However, in front of Lu Feng, they felt as if they were ants. If young Netherworld king didn't threaten them with all the geniuses and monstrous existences of the human race, they would probably all perish here. Without a doubt, this was a kind of humiliation, a great humiliation. Others could ignore it, but as monstrous existences, how could they ignore it? Countless people were silent. However, when they wanted to take revenge, they sadly found that they didn't have any ability at all. They wanted to take revenge, but they had no way to do so. This is the ancient altar. Lu Feng walked on the path to the top of the altar. Now, he finally understood why these people wanted to enter this place at all costs, and why they said that there wouldn't be any killing in this place. When Lu Feng just stepped on the altar, he felt that this place was filled with a kind of hazy restriction. This restriction seemed to be derived from a kind of law that appeared inexplicably in his heart, making him unable to resist. This restriction stipulated that he couldn't kill. Although he didn't experience it clearly, Lu Feng could feel that if he killed in this place, he would be completely obliterated by this restriction in an instant. This was something that couldn't be reversed, unless he reached the level of the existence that created these laws one day. This should be the place where the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors of the human Tao era condensed. The 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors should have the power of a supreme ruler. To reverse their existence, one would need to be at least a supreme ruler-level existence. I'm afraid that in the endless time and space of the future, only the Shakyamuni Buddha and the human king could do it. Lu Feng sighed slightly. He was an emperor. From the moment he awakened, his nobility surpassed the bestowment of his fate. Therefore, he didn't like to be restrained or controlled in any way. Unfortunately, he didn't have the strength to surpass this level yet, so he didn't have the capital to break away from everything. Back then, I was able to transcend everything in that realm and walk my own path. In that case, I will definitely be able to do it in the future. Lu Feng was incomparably firm about himself. If he didn't have the confidence to win, if he didn't believe that he was invincible, how could he have used himself as a target to condense an invincible vision? One had to know that condensing a vision of oneself required not only aptitude, but also strength and courage. More importantly, it required an invincible belief. He had to have the most firm belief in himself. He had to believe that he was invincible and that he would never fail. Only then could he succeed. If he failed once, everything would disappear in the end and become a thing of the past. Lu Feng had such a belief. He had always believed that he was invincible. During the process of condensing, he wasn't afraid of any challenge. A peak evolution period martialist challenged the perfect crown prince of the heavenly Tao. A peak upheaval period martialist challenged the demon king's avatar with 6 supreme powers. A peak perfection period martialist challenged the master of the 6th Tao and suppressed a supreme existence at the true God level. All of this didn't allow for the slightest mistake. However, he didn't retreat and chose to fight. In the end, he succeeded and condensed his own invincible avatar. He had survived such difficulties. What about the future? In the future, Lu Feng would still succeed. He had unwavering faith in himself. After taking a deep breath, Lu Feng started to climb the ancient altar. Unlike the altar in the depths of Gufang's star, there were no illusions here. Once one stepped on it, they could reach the peak. Lu Feng didn't move forward quickly. This was because he felt an inexplicable feeling along the way. This feeling gave him a sense of familiarity, as if he had thought of many things. However, when Lu Feng tried to recall what he had thought of, he realized that he couldn't remember anything. One step after another, many people behind him had already surpassed him and reached the top of the altar. However, Lu Feng was still moving slowly. Lu Feng was the first to step on the altar. However, not long after, he became one of the last few people. However, Lu Feng still didn't choose to go up quickly. He really didn't want to. What is all this for? Finally, Lu Feng stopped. At this moment, he finally felt it. It was a kind of calling that came from the bottom of his heart. It was a hazy existence that couldn't be ignored. Lu Feng wanted to break the connection, but he realized that it was futile. They had truly existed since the beginning, causing him to constantly recall them. It wasn't dense, but it really existed. Furthermore, the feeling of being called made Lu Feng's heart tremble, and he felt a slight pain. It was as if this calling represented a sad past, a past that he couldn't let go of. Raising his head and looking at the peak, Lu Feng realized that after walking for so long, he was still very far from the top. There was no one behind him. Lu Feng knew that he was the last person. However, he didn't speed up. He was still walking slowly. Time passed very quickly. Other people used a few minutes to reach the top of the altar. However, Lu Feng used 2 whole days to reach the top of the altar. This was undoubtedly very puzzling. At the very least, the existences cultivating quietly at the top of the altar all had the same expression when they saw Lu Feng finally arrive. Of course, these people wouldn't ask anything. They knew that Lu Feng was different from them. He had his reasons for doing this. As Lu Feng stood quietly in the center of the cultivation ground, which was filled with mysterious laws, a hint of doubt appeared in his eyes. Really, it's so familiar. Why do I keep feeling an indescribable sense of familiarity? It seems like a lost past. Vaguely, Lu Feng thought of many scenes that had appeared in his mind in the past. However, those scenes were fleeting and didn't seem to leave any traces. At this moment, Lu Feng suddenly recalled some things. Unfortunately, the memories he recalled were too fragmented and he couldn't understand anything. Once, was there really a past? I have never heard of the existence of reincarnation. Even the strongest overlords have never reincarnated. Then, do I really have a past? Chapter 672. Even the overlords of epics, the 3 sovereigns, the 5 emperors, and the Shakyamuni Buddha had never reincarnated before. As for the 5 taboo kings, they weren't reincarnated. Instead, they had crossed epochs and arrived here through an unusual method. They hadn't reincarnated either. Lu Feng really didn't know if reincarnation really existed in this space-time, in this universe, or in the endless epoch. If there isn't, then what are those images? At this moment, Lu Feng was a little confused. He didn't know what he wanted to know or what he wanted to get. He was just confused and lost. After a long time, Lu Feng's eyes finally showed a trace of spirit. At this moment, the confusion was gone. That incomparably confident look appeared in Lu Feng's eyes again. He didn't hesitate. The next moment, he had already stepped out and walked directly into the altar. Feeling that the surrounding space was filled with that kind of aura, Lu Feng's eyes flashed. This was an expression of extreme excitement. Lu Feng felt it. He really felt it thoroughly. This is the feeling of the realm of time. But it's different from the realm of time and the realm of time. The flow of time here is even more terrifying. And here, it's filled with the existence of laws and power. These laws and mysteries aren't unique to this place. It's the same feeling as the original universe. Holy Land. This is definitely an earth-shaking holy land. This was definitely an earth-shaking holy land. A place like this could definitely create monstrous talents in batches. Even the most ordinary existence's achievements and speed of cultivation here wouldn't be any worse than any monstrous talent. What a terrifying place. But it's a pity that there's a limit to the time one can enter here. If it wasn't for that, it would be really terrifying. Supreme Kings only had 5 days, while ordinary geniuses only had 1 day. Such a limit made those with ordinary talents lose the opportunity to defy the heavens. Forget it. Let's cultivate first. I'm a taboo king. At least, I have the 5-day cultivation time that belongs to a supreme king. According to the 1,000-fold acceleration, 5 days is equivalent to 5,000 days in the outside world. This is enough for me. 5,000 days was equivalent to more than 10 years. Since Lu Feng's debut, coupled with the enhancement of the realm of time and the realm of time, it was only this number. Now, the amount of time he spent cultivating was equivalent to more than double the amount of time he had spent cultivating. Naturally, this was an opportunity for Lu Fenglai to transform. Without caring about anyone, Lu Feng walked to the nearest seat and closed his eyes. Although the area at the peak of the altar was not terrifyingly vast, it was still quite huge. Lu Feng sensed a little and understood that it was at least the size of a large square. Not to mention a few hundred people, even millions of people could be easily accommodated without feeling crowded. Therefore, Lu Feng chose a large space with no one around. In this case, Lu Feng was happy to be able to cultivate quietly. At least 5,000 days of cultivation time was really enough for Lu Fenglai. There were only 3 things that were most important for him at the moment. First, he had to continue to improve his martial arts comprehension to the peak of this realm. Then, he had to condense his cultivation method and let his cultivation method carry the will of a god. Of course, the most important thing was to improve his cultivation as a psyche master. Demigods are always in the demigod realm. This realm is just a transition, so my martial path incarnation can't be condensed at all. In this way, it can save some time. Now, Lu Feng's martial path incarnation was already at the 7th grade level. If he entered the level of a god now, then he could upgrade his martial path incarnation to the 8th grade level. An 8th grade martial path incarnation would undoubtedly make Tongtian Futu even more terrifying and extreme. Unfortunately, although the demigod realm was also at the 4th grade level, it was not an independent level. Therefore, he could not upgrade it. In the next moment, Lu Feng had already begun to cultivate. He began to cultivate crazily. It had to be said that after experiencing so many collisions, Lu Feng's understanding of martial arts had entered an incredible level. This was far from being comparable to any warrior of the same level. I'm afraid that only the Immortal King and the Demon King have more comprehension than me. After all, they have experienced too many battles. The Immortal King, the Demon King, and the other 3 Taboo Kings had all shuttled through endless time and space. The number of battles they had fought was extremely terrifying. No one could imagine it. Even Lu Feng, who had experienced countless battles, was far from comparable. However, except for these 4 people, Lu Feng was already invincible among those of the same level. No one could compare to him. Therefore, after spending nearly 100 days, Lu Feng finally completed the modification of the cultivation method. This was undoubtedly very shocking. It was just that he had really completed it just like that. It was so thorough. Feeling the powerful strength contained in his cultivation method, Lu Feng also slowly woke up from his contemplation. At this moment, a satisfied smile hung on the corner of his mouth. The success this time was actually a matter of course. It was completely within his calculations. Therefore, even if he succeeded, Lu Feng was not very surprised. In the next moment, Lu Feng once again entered the state of comprehension. This time, the direction of his comprehension was the comprehension of the profoundness of martial arts. Without the help of the human king's Lu family's path of inheritance, Lu Feng's comprehension speed had undoubtedly slowed down a lot. However, although it was slow, relying on his own talent and understanding of martial arts, Lu Feng still completely completed it in an extremely short period of time. When 300 days had passed, Lu Feng had completely completed it. I have now reached the peak. Before becoming a 4th-level demigod, my comprehension is already considered the strongest. The rest of the time will be used to cultivate as a telekinesis master. It's a pity that my 2 souls are sealed here. Otherwise, the remaining 5,000 days would be enough for me to continue living in fear. There were gains and losses. Although he couldn't cultivate with 2 souls, Lu Fenglai still considered it pretty good. After all, this was the first time he had encountered such an opportunity. By now, many people had already left. Their time to cultivate was limited. Before Lu Feng had entered, many geniuses had already reached the end of their time. Therefore, the number of people there was already very little. After sensing it once more and confirming that killing one another was really not allowed there, Lu Feng finally sank his consciousness into Shen Yuan's sea of consciousness. There, he would wholeheartedly focus on cultivating as a telekinesis master and would not tolerate any disturbances. Therefore, Lu Feng wanted to ensure that his cultivation was peaceful. The moment he entered Shen Yuan's sea of consciousness, Lu Feng appeared above the sea of consciousness. At the moment, he scanned the entire sea of consciousness. However, he still didn't see the existence of his second soul, which was also his second primordial spirit. Lu Feng only understood how terrifying this place was when he arrived there. The nomological laws here restricted his dual soul mystique, and this restriction was actually able to penetrate deep into his spiritual sea divine plane and completely seal his second primordial spirit. There was no doubt that such a method could be considered terrifying. This is indeed a world condensed by one of the supreme existences of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. Even though the laws here have been weakened for countless eras, they still possess such shocking power. This must be the unparalleled power of the supreme ruler. At the moment, Lu Feng was even more in awe of the supreme ruler. After all, such strength was indeed terrifying. Lu Feng's spiritual body slowly closed his eyes as he quietly floated above Shen Yuan's sea of consciousness. At the moment, he began to quietly comprehend. If he wanted to go from the advanced stage of the divine transformation realm to the initial stage of the divine transformation realm, he would need the accumulation of time. According to his original estimation, he would need at least 10 years to accumulate with the help of this abnormal Shen Yuan. Some time had passed before this. According to Lu Feng's calculations, he would need at least 3,000 days to reach the advanced stage of the divine transformation realm. This was also an astonishing number. If it had been any other time, Lu Feng would definitely have wasted 8 years to cultivate as a psychic. After all, when he went out, he could rely on his 2 souls to quietly cultivate and use the realm of time to constantly accelerate. However, things were different now. This was because he had already improved everything to the highest level in this place. His comprehension of various laws had reached an astonishing level. Basically, everything that could be cultivated on the path of martial arts had already reached the peak. This made it impossible for him to continue cultivating. At the moment, all he could do was cultivate as a psychic. It's a pity that my great devil true body needs endless tempering. As for the demigod level, you need other aspects in order to advance. Originally, my great devil true body was a supreme technique that far surpassed other people's. However, at this moment it has become the most useless technique in this place. Lu Feng smiled slightly helplessly. If it was in the outside world, then his great devil true body would absolutely be an incomparably terrifying supreme technique. Its might would shock the world, and it was enough to make any existence's inherited techniques lose their splendor. His current cultivation speed had already proved everything. Although he had worked hard and risked his life to achieve this. However, this could not erase the shocking effect of the great devil true body. Lu Feng knew that if it had not been for the great devil true body, he would not have been able to achieve his current strength, even if he had worked hard and experienced twice as much pain. Therefore, Lu Feng was grateful for the great devil true body from the bottom of his heart. As for those words, he was only casually saying them. With a slight sigh, Lu Feng finally closed his eyes again and began the incomparably long cultivation. Chapter 673. Breakthrough. Feeling his current state, young Netherworld King's eyes revealed a trace of coldness. He didn't feel any excitement about the breakthrough. Instead, he felt humiliated. He remembered everything that Lu Feng had given him so clearly. It reached deep into his soul, and he would never forget it for the rest of his life. Therefore, after the breakthrough, young Netherworld King's first reaction was to find Lu Feng to take revenge. However, after weighing the pros and cons, he gave up in the end. I'm only in the 3rd layer of the demigod realm, but I'm still too far away from the Emperor. It seems that the legends from back then were not wrong. They were all true. The Emperor did not rely on the cooperation of the human race to complete the shocking sacred site. When they collided just now, he had already displayed a shocking power. Looking at the endless space-time, I'm afraid that even human kings are not his match. After becoming a demigod, his power is even more limitless. I'm only in the 3rd layer of the demigod realm. I'm not his match at all. If I want to defeat him, who is in the 1st layer of the demigod realm, I must at least reach the 4th layer of the demigod realm, or even the divine seal realm. However, as I'm improving, so is the Emperor. Therefore, I have to work harder to improve. This time, the ruins will be my opportunity to surpass him. Previously, young Netherworld King had also paid attention to Lu Feng's existence. He discovered that after a few thousand days, Lu Feng still had not broken through. He was still in the 1st layer of the demigod realm. Although he didn't know why, this was enough. Because as long as Lu Feng's realm didn't increase, and Lu Feng's strength didn't improve, then anything was possible. This proved that as long as he continued to improve, there was still a possibility of surpassing Lu Feng. Therefore, young Netherworld King had already gone crazy. He didn't care about anything else. He only hoped to improve his cultivation as soon as possible and surpass Lu Feng. He hoped that one day, before Lu Feng achieved great success, he would be able to avenge his humiliation. He might even be able to suppress Lu Feng. Therefore, young Netherworld King once again fell into endless cultivation. In a trance, 3,000 days had passed. At this moment, there was nothing left on the altar. A Supreme King could cultivate for 5,000 days, and besides Lu Feng, Feather Nether Ronghua, and young Netherworld King, there were no other Supreme Kings. Lu Feng spent 2 full days to reach the altar. But young Netherworld King, Feather Yu Ronghua, and the others had entered this place on the first day. So, they basically didn't have much time left. Finally, after 3,000 days had passed, Lu Luo left. He was the king of slaughter, and he only had 4,000 days to cultivate. When the time was up, he would leave in the end. At this moment, only Lu Feng and the other 2 were left on the altar. At this time, Lu Feng was still cultivating. However, his cultivation had reached the final moment because the final moment of the incarnation realm had finally arrived. At that moment, although the second soul was sealed, Lu Feng still felt the arrival of a sense of perfection. He knew that his second soul had finally reached the incarnation realm's perfection realm. This was a breakthrough. Although it wasn't much, Lu Feng was still very satisfied when this moment arrived. While cultivating, a trace of excitement appeared on Lu Feng's face. The divine transformation realm has reached the great completion realm. The next step I need to take is to become a divine transformation realm. As long as I reach the great completion realm, then I will enter the true divine master realm. A divine master was an existence that was more honorable than an ordinary true god. After becoming a divine master, Lu Feng could begin to further comprehend those supreme immortal techniques. At that time, whether it was the green firmament or other supreme immortal techniques, they would all enter a more powerful realm. The destructive firmament and power of power formed by their fusion would also be terrifying to a whole new level. When the time comes, if I reach the peak of the demigod realm, and if my psychic master also reaches the peak of the demigod realm, then by relying on this invincible power, I will even be qualified to challenge a heavenly god. The limit was not even that of a deity, but he would even have the strength to challenge a heavenly god. Such an achievement and such a power of power would definitely surpass all limits in the endless time and space. Even the human monarchs had never been able to achieve such a feat after all. A heavenly god represented the control of laws. Their existence was more than one level stronger than a true god's. If Lu Feng hadn't condensed this supreme combat body, if he hadn't condensed the true vision of the great emperor, if he hadn't comprehended the power of destruction and condensed the existence of the black hole, then he really wouldn't have dared to challenge a heavenly god's existence. Although all of this is just my thoughts, in theory, when the time comes, I really do have that kind of power. It's still too early to say these things. What I need now is to continuously improve my own strength. After understanding all of this, Lu Feng once again closed his eyes and entered his own Shen Yuan Sea of consciousness. Now, following Lu Feng's cultivation, the area of the Shen Yuan Sea of consciousness had expanded to a terrifying extent. In this place, it could really be considered endless. Naturally, this meant that the power that Lu Feng could use had also reached an almost limitless level. Previously, Lu Feng had quietly cultivated here for a total of 3,000 days. At that time, he had been wholeheartedly cultivating. This time, he had come here to comprehend and break through. In his mind, he had already started to recall the introduction of the Origin Sutra's fourth realm, the divine realm, and started to comprehend the true essence of cultivation. The divine realm is actually not very difficult to understand by comparing it to my current realm and the psychic master realm. This realm actually exists for the sake of transforming and becoming a supreme deity. Of course, in the psychic master realm, this deity refers to the divine master realm. If the divine realm reached the small success realm, then Lu Feng could rely on countless resources to raise his level to the peak of the demigod realm. Once he reached the large success realm, he would break through completely and become a true deity. This was the true essence of the divine realm. To Lu Fenglai, this realm was actually the easiest to understand. The key to becoming a deity is actually the four realms. This is the comprehension of the demigod fourth level. For psychic masters and martialists, it is actually completely the same. Therefore, to become a deity, one actually has to pass through the demigod fourth level. Lu Feng vaguely understood what was going on. He knew that the divinity realm this time would be different from the previous ones. If he wanted to reach the small success stage, he couldn't just comprehend it. He needed to be like a martial artist, passing through four realms. Although he didn't know if it was correct, Lu Feng still decided to follow his own ideas. After all, he was the only one who had cultivated the primordial scripture in the endless space and time. Therefore, he could only rely on his own exploration. Moreover, Lu Feng also understood that if he failed, he would at most lose a little time. He still had at least 2,000 days left. This time was definitely enough for him to squander. Once he thought of it, he would do it. This was Lu Feng's character. Therefore, in the next moment, Lu Feng had already sunk into a state of quiet comprehension. The ultimate goal of his cultivation was the cultivation of the divine body. Of course, there was no such thing as a divine body when it came to soul cultivation. However, Lu Feng could imagine himself as having a divine body. If that was the case, then cultivating would at most waste a little time. There wouldn't be any disastrous consequences. When he thought of this, Lu Feng didn't hesitate. He began to study how to cultivate. Time slowly passed again. When Lu Feng finally thought of a way, more than 100 days had passed. This time, he woke up from his meditation. Of course, it wasn't that Lu Feng had thought of a way. Instead, he sensed an existence walking beside him. Looking at the slowly approaching figure, Lu Feng's eyes were filled with a kind of calmness. Finally, the figure came to Lu Feng's side. Lu Feng, she spoke softly with two simple words. Lu Feng nodded slowly. He had already promised her that he, Lu Feng, would not take action or make things difficult for them unless they took the initiative to provoke him again. Of course, this was a promise now and a promise in the future. Therefore, when Lu Feng saw his arrival, he was no longer filled with hatred like before. Feather Yu Ronghua, you've broken through. Back then, Feather Yu Ronghua was only a first-level demigod. Now, he had already broken through and become a terrifying existence of the demigod stage 3. From this, Lu Feng could see that Yu Ronghua was truly a peerless genius. Although he had the help of Yu Qingran's bloodline, it was still his own talent that helped him become the supreme monstrous genius of this era. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to comprehend the power of the six paths. Feather Yu Ronghua only smiled at Lu Feng's words. He knew that he couldn't be compared to Lu Feng. He knew everything about Lu Feng's past. Therefore, he knew that he couldn't be compared to Lu Feng. He was far from being comparable. Moreover, in this era of War of the Kings, in this chaotic era, he no longer regarded Lu Feng as his mortal enemy. This time, he came to express his attitude. Lu Feng naturally understood. However, although he had promised Feather Yu Qingran, Lu Feng still held a grudge in his heart. For the sake of the human race, he might not go against Feather Yu Ronghua and his family, but he couldn't be friends with him. After all, Lu Feng was such a person. Lu Feng, this time I've become a third-level demigod. Although I don't know why you're still a first-level demigod after so long, I understand that I'm no match for you. However, I won't give up. One day, I'll challenge you again. I want to prove that I, Feather Yu Ronghua, am not weaker than you. This was Feather Yu Ronghua's belief. Although he knew that he couldn't be compared to Lu Feng, he still wanted to fight. If one day he was strong enough to challenge Lu Feng, he wouldn't hesitate to kill him again. This was the source of his pride as a supreme king. Lu Feng chuckled and nodded. After looking at Lu Feng for the last time, Feather Yu Ronghua's figure gradually faded and eventually turned into nothingness. He had cultivated here for 5,000 days, which was enough. Therefore, he disappeared and was sent to the outside world by the law of this place. Seeing that Feather Yu Ronghua had completely disappeared, Lu Feng still didn't immerse himself in cultivation. At this moment, there was a cold smile at the corner of his mouth. All of a sudden, Lu Feng's voice was slowly transmitted. "Young Netherworld King, you've been spying on me since a long time ago. You should have appeared by now." Lu Feng's perception was so terrifying. How could he not feel young Netherworld King's spying? He just didn't want to say it because he wanted to cultivate. Now, young Netherworld King was about to leave. Therefore, Lu Feng wanted to expose him and face him. Hearing Lu Feng's words, a figure slowly appeared. Compared to Feather Yu Ronghua, young Netherworld King's appearance was much more shocking. His existence was filled with too many wills. His divine aura was no longer concealed. Lu Feng could clearly feel that although young Netherworld King had yet to take the final step, he had already reached a kind of extreme, a kind of terrifying realm. Right now, he was really only a step away from becoming a god. Chapter 674. The coldness in his eyes became even more obvious. Not bad, is this what it means to endure humiliation? To think that in these 5,000 days, he managed to break through the two limits and become a pinnacle demigod. Young Netherworld King had already condensed his godhead, and now he only needed to ignite his godly fire. It had to be said that this was a very shocking breakthrough. Although more than 10 years had passed, 10 years in the outside world was enough for him to become a true god or even a sky god. But this wasn't the original universe. It was considered good to be able to break through one level here. After all, they couldn't use any weapons here, and they lost the unlimited supply of resources. The accumulation of these peak demigods was extremely terrifying, and it was thousands of times more than ordinary people or geniuses of the same level. To be able to break through to such a level in such a short period of time, this was enough to explain many things. Hearing Lu Feng's words, young Netherworld King's eyes flashed with a trace of viciousness. At this moment, he naturally thought of Lu Fengji's words about enduring humiliation for the greater good. Indeed, if Lu Feng wasn't so overbearing and didn't insist on killing him, young Netherworld King wouldn't have done such a crazy thing. It could be said that since he was born, he had never been humiliated like this. Now that Lu Feng deliberately mentioned it again, he was really going crazy. "Emperor, don't be happy too early. I remember the humiliation you gave me. I'll calculate it one by one and return it to the human race." His eyes were burning with killing intent. Lu Feng didn't doubt young Netherworld King's shocking killing intent toward the human race. However, seeing him like this, Lu Feng was still the same as before. "If you want to kill me, then I'll wait for you. A young Netherworld King won't be able to cause much trouble." Young Netherworld King. In the past 1,000 years, only 2 people were able to obtain the title of young Netherworld King in the entire Netherworld race, and this was already the most glorious moment in modern times. There weren't many young Netherworld Kings in the history of the Netherworld race, and there might not even be one in tens of thousands of years. Therefore, the existence of the young Underworld monarch was definitely a quasi-supreme to the entire Underworld race. It was indescribably noble, much nobler than the quasi-life and death quasi-monarch. But here, in Lu Feng's words, he was just like those ordinary geniuses who could be killed or robbed. How could young Netherworld King be at ease? A trace of redness appeared on his face, and his expression became even colder. Looking at Lu Feng, the young Netherworld King slowly said, "Emperor, although I don't know why, I'm not sure. However, you're only a first-tier demigod now. This is an undeniable fact." Just now, at the last moment, I've reached the final pinnacle. I've become a true pinnacle demigod. I've deified my body, my soul, and my will. Now I've even condensed a godhead. My strength is not something that you, a mere deified fleshly body, can compare with. You are a taboo monarch comparable to a human monarch. Even if ordinary geniuses were one level higher than you, they would still be no match for you. However, I'm different. I'm a monstrous genius of an epoch. I'm a supreme king. An existence like me can be considered the most terrifying monstrous genius in the endless space-time. Moreover, I've already begun to comprehend the fourth supreme power. Now, I'm 3 levels higher than you. I don't believe that I'm still no match for you. In his eyes, there was an incomparably scorching look, filled with a vigorous fighting spirit and a shocking killing intent. Young Netherworld King was about to go crazy. He had cultivated himself to the pinnacle of existence. He was much, much stronger than Lu Feng. Therefore, he no longer intended to endure. Emperor, you should rejoice. You should rejoice that you can't use force here. Otherwise, you would have been completely annihilated. Lu Feng sat cross-legged on the altar quietly. After hearing young Netherworld King's crazy words, his face was expressionless. This was true expressionlessness. It wasn't a deliberate act. Even his eyes were incomparably calm, without any fluctuation. Young Netherworld King could naturally see that such an expression was a kind of complete disregard. It was as if an incomparably great existence was ignoring the challenge of an ant. Therefore, he became even more furious. What qualifications do you have to be calm now? What qualifications do you have to ignore me? Emperor, who do you think you are? If you really have the guts, then I'll wait for you outside 2 days later. Let's have a life-and-death battle under the witness of many existences of the underworld tribe and the human race. The Almighty behind us are not allowed to interfere. We'll make a life-and-death contract to determine the winner. Do you dare? Do you really dare? Young Netherworld King wouldn't have said such words if it was under normal circumstances. After all, he was now a peak 4th-level demigod, while Lu Feng was only a 1st-level demigod. The difference between the two was almost an entire level. An existence like him had always challenged those who were far more powerful than him. When had he ever challenged an opponent whose level was lower than his? Unfortunately, he was now blinded by anger. He had forgotten everything. There was only endless slaughter in front of him. Moreover, in young Netherworld King's heart, even if he had become a peak demigod, even if Lu Feng was only a 1st-level demigod, he was still equal to him. Young Netherworld King always believed that the current Lu Feng absolutely had the strength to challenge him. Therefore, he was so crazy that he even forgot his own pride. Hearing this, Lu Feng's eyes finally flashed with a trace of fluctuation. The next moment, he slowly stood up from the ground. The fluctuation in his eyes became more obvious. There was even a kind of terrifying boiling. This was battle intent. This was the kind of terrifying battle intent that was surging endlessly. Challenge? Lu Feng didn't pay attention to the challenges of ants because it was a waste of time and tarnished his honor. However, at this moment, he accepted young Netherworld King's challenge. Because young Netherworld King was already qualified to confront him. Now, he was qualified to face him. Moreover, he was the young Netherworld King of the Netherworld race, while he was the Emperor of the human race. Between the two great races, it was destined that only one of them could survive. This was the arrangement of fate. In the past, the monstrous genius of the human race, heavenly deity Jialan, rampaged through the void and chased after young Netherworld King in hundreds of super-galaxies. In the end, he was completely killed. And now, I will complete the continuation of the past. 2 days later, no matter what, I will appear. Young Netherworld King, at that time, let's have a showdown. Young Netherworld King's figure disappeared. His time was up. However, Lu Feng could still vaguely see the shocking battle intent in his eyes. This was a terrifying will that couldn't be erased. It was a kind of extreme madness. Lu Feng knew that 2 days later, there would definitely be an earth-shaking battle. A fourth-level demigod of the epoch, a strange smile hung on the corner of Lu Feng's mouth. In the past, he challenged the crown prince of the heavenly Tao when he was at the peak of the evolution realm. Relying on 4 supreme powers, he defeated the crown prince of the heavenly Tao who had suppressed his strength to the early upheaval transformation realm. In the past, he fought the Devil King's clone when he was at the peak of the upheaval transformation realm. Facing the Devil King who had 6 supreme powers, he suppressed the Devil King with his supreme divine ability. At that time, the Devil King who had 6 supreme powers could even kill an ordinary Supreme King who was 1 level higher than him. Therefore, Lu Feng, who had 2 souls, was able to fight and kill the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao, who was at the peak of the upheaval transformation realm. Later, his power was strengthened again and became even more terrifying. His comprehension of supreme powers had almost doubled to reach the level of 7 supreme powers that could only be achieved in the late monarch battle realm. Moreover, the 3 newly comprehended supreme powers were not ordinary supreme powers. All of them were at the peak of the upheaval transformation realm or had surpassed the peak of the upheaval transformation realm. In addition to the terrifying abstrusity that I obtained from watching the battle between the supreme rulers, I have now achieved the most terrifying battle physique and the terrifying realm that I have reached. As long as I raise my Psyche Master level to the first tier of the demigod realm, the young underworld monarch will definitely be able to suppress him completely. Now, he was confident that he could kill the young underworld monarch who was at the peak of the demigod realm. However, the price he would have to pay would be too terrifying. He would have to display at least 1 billion mortal dust and 1 billion immortals. After all, the young underworld monarch was already at the peak of the demigod realm and had even comprehended 3 or almost 4 supreme powers. Such a young underworld monarch was much stronger than the ordinary monstrous geniuses of the new era. Moreover, how could a scheming existence like the young underworld monarch not have his own trump cards? Lu Feng really didn't want to use the ultimate immortal technique easily. After all, the ultimate immortal technique would consume too much energy. Even someone as powerful as him would be severely injured. Therefore, I have to cultivate even faster. Within 2,000 days, I must reach the level of a Psyche Master at the first tier of the demigod realm. Lu Feng was never afraid of any challenge. Every time he became powerful, he obtained it through an extremely oppressive cultivation environment. This time was no exception. Only the most terrifying pressure could give him the most powerful motivation. Gradually, Lu Feng fell into an endless state of enlightenment once again. This time, there really wasn't any existence that came to disturb him. Time continued to pass. Finally, on the 3,500th day since he entered this place, Lu Feng had finally completed the cultivation method. Lu Feng knew that his direction had never been wrong. His cultivation direction was the most correct direction. After a moment of silence, Lu Feng had already understood the direction of his cultivation. The next moment, it was time to start cultivating. In order to ensure victory in this battle, Lu Feng really put his heart and soul into it. Lu Feng's spiritual body kept forming countless complicated and mysterious cultivation hand seals, which started to cause the entire Shen Yuan's spiritual sea to churn wildly. At this moment, his cultivation speed was also increasing, reaching one peak after another. Unfortunately, the cultivation of a Psyche Master and the origin scripture required time and comprehension. Once one's comprehension reached a certain level, they would need an endless amount of time to accumulate. Only then would they be able to break through. Lu Feng had already understood the direction of his cultivation path and seen the way forward. However, he still couldn't complete it in one go. Therefore, Lu Feng could only rely on the accumulation of time and cultivate continuously. 100 days, 200 days. In a trance, Lu Feng had already cultivated for 4,800 days in the altar ruins. This was equivalent to 13 years in the outside world. 13 years had passed in a flash. However, he was still in a state of endless tranquility. Cultivation knew no time. In the blink of an eye, one would experience the vicissitudes of life. Unknowingly, time had passed quietly. Finally, one day, Lu Feng opened his eyes slowly. There was an extremely satisfied look on his face. He had succeeded. He had really succeeded. After spending close to 2,000 days cultivating day and night, he finally succeeded. Chapter 675. Lu Feng stood up slowly and stretched his body. Excitement flashed across his face when he sensed that he had completed his breakthrough. Demigod First Level. This is not the initial stage of the Primordial Sutra's fourth level. There is no precise definition of this level. It does not have the initial stage or great stage. It only has to evolve step by step until it becomes a god. Clearly, I have completed the first step. Now, what I need to do is to raise my mental strength to demigod first level. The mind power of a first-level demigod allowed Lu Feng's mind power to improve once again. The primitive immortal power in his sea of consciousness could also be further strengthened and evolved. The amount of primitive immortal power he could use at one time had also increased considerably. Therefore, Lu Feng had to raise his mental strength. After sensing it for a while, a strange expression appeared on Lu Feng's face. After a while, he sighed softly. My accumulation is indeed terrifying. Just now, Lu Feng had sensed how terrifying and incomprehensible his accumulation was. Such accumulation made it extremely difficult for him to break through. I'm afraid that the average genius psychic would only need 1,000th or even 1/10,000th of my energy to break through at the same level, 1,000th or even 1/10,000th, and this was compared to a genius. If he were to compare it to an ordinary person, it would be thousands or even tens of thousands of times more. In other words, the resources he would need to waste to break through were tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of times more than an ordinary person. No wonder. Every monstrous genius must have a terrifying force behind them. Otherwise, it would be too difficult to break through. Thinking of this, Lu Feng looked slightly relieved. If he were to rely on absorbing the energy of the elixirs, he would have to spend tens of days or even hundreds of days to raise his psychic master level to demigod first tier. Moreover, he would not be able to use any elixirs. After all, in the ruins, no items could be used. Although his independent space did not count as an item, it was still within the limitations. However, it was different this time because he had an extremely terrifying reserve of power. King's Prayer, it's all thanks to the King's Prayer. If it wasn't for the existence of these forces, then I really wouldn't have been able to break through in such a short time. In this place, all items were forbidden. Even independent spaces could not be opened. Therefore, if he wanted to break through here, he would have to rely on his own body to cultivate. In that case, it would be too slow. Fortunately, the endless power stored in the King's Prayer exists in a kind of unseen world. The existence of this power is not restricted by anything. As long as there is a need, it can be directly extracted without any obstruction. At the next moment, Lu Feng finally began to connect with the existence in the unseen world. The moment he connected, an endless amount of power appeared. It didn't go through any channels and directly poured into Lu Feng's body. Feeling this endless and pure power, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a light that could shake the world. This power, it's really pure. The King's Prayer used an ancient ritual to transform the endless power into the purest form of power. This kind of power could be absorbed and used by any existence. It could be said that this was the most extreme power, a power that could make any existence go crazy. Of course, it was impossible for ordinary people to receive such treatment. In the universe, there was no family that could gather hundreds of virtual king, almighties, and 3 quasi-kings. Those who could receive such a prayer ceremony were all true god kings and supreme existences. Lu Feng was the only exception since ancient times. Even the mortal kings of the past had never received such treatment. Pure energy has allowed me to absorb it at least 10 times faster than before. In this case, I'm afraid I won't even need 10 days to complete the advancement. If it was an ordinary person, they would probably be able to complete the advancement in an instant. Even if it was a monstrous existence, they would probably be able to succeed in 10 minutes. However, for Lu Fenglai, he still needed 10 days. This was a kind of helplessness and also a kind of madness. He had stayed here for 13 years, so these 10 days were really nothing to him. In the blink of an eye, Lu Feng had completed the final breakthrough. Feeling that he had really reached the peak of the realm, his eyes were filled with a kind of endless, terrifying, and vigorous fighting spirit. Lu Feng could feel that he was truly terrifying. He was completely gone. At this moment, his fighting strength was unprecedentedly strong. In the face of young Netherworld King's challenge, he only had a strong fighting spirit. This battle can start now. The next moment, Lu Feng finally moved slowly. Although there was still a lot of time left, this time was meaningless to Lu Fenglai. In this realm, he had reached the peak of everything. In this altar, in this ruin, any kind of power could not be used. His martial arts cultivation relied on tribulations and resistance. Pure cultivation was not useful at all. The cultivation of a psyche master required comprehension before they could break through. However, he was now only a first-tier demigod. He had no understanding of second-tier demigods. It was even more impossible. Therefore, even if Lu Feng continued to stay here for another 200 days, there was no meaning. In comparison, Lu Feng hoped that he could take advantage of the time to go out and have a good battle with young Netherworld King. If I can achieve the great star demon body at this time, I can also use this time to enter the sky reaching Fudu and open the 4th level. Unfortunately, it is impossible now. This time, it will be a waste. Lu Feng did not hesitate and began to use his consciousness to communicate with the laws here. When he came, he already knew the way to leave. As long as he could communicate with his consciousness, he could leave this place. Lu Feng was very proficient in communicating with his mind. However, in the next moment, an ugly expression appeared on his face. Because he did not leave this place, Lu Feng's gaze froze slightly. He tried again, but the result was still the same. At this moment, Lu Feng's face was really gloomy. If he wanted to leave this place, this was not the only way. If he was strong enough, he could use his own strength to tear the void and leave completely. However, he was still too far away from that level. What he tore was only the time hole in the original universe. What he needed to tear here was the space crystal wall. The gap between the two was simply incalculable. If one had to talk about the lowest ability to tear this place, then it would be to control the laws. This meant that Lu Feng had to at least have the strength of a divine master. If I want to have the strength of a divine master, then I have to at least reach the level of a peak demigod. Once he reached the level of a peak demigod, then according to Lu Feng's terrifying strength, his level could instantly rise to the level of a high-level true god. Although there was an insurmountable gap between a divine master and a true god, if he added his invincible power, it would definitely be enough to reach the level of a beginner divine master. This was Lu Feng's power, the invincible power of Lu Feng before he became a divine master. However, he really could not wait until then. In a place like this, if I want to break through, the amount of time I need is not small. However, it will not be long before this place is completely closed. The next time I appear, it will be 2,000 or even 3,000 years later. If there were no Wangzhan or other battles, then Lu Feng could wait. However, he could not wait now. 3,000 years later, the entire era would change. At that time, even if he had astonishing combat strength, even if he surpassed the primogenitor human king, what could he do? The people he needed to protect were no longer there, and the reason he needed to persevere had disappeared. What was the point of returning then? Therefore, Lu Feng could not wait, he could not wait. He had to leave, and he had to do his best to leave this place. His anxious emotions gradually calmed down. At this moment, Lu Feng began to search for a solution. Time continued to pass, but Lu Feng still had not come up with a solution. Finally, just as he was getting a little frustrated, an extremely strange expression suddenly appeared on his face. This was not because Lu Feng had found a solution and thought of a way to leave, but because at this moment, he saw. "Who are you?" Looking at the hazy figure in front of him, Lu Feng was completely silent. This was just a figure. Even its existence gave Lu Feng an illusion that there were no fluctuations. This kind of feeling was like a shadow. After hearing Lu Feng's words, the figure remained silent. Lu Feng frowned slightly. He really did not know why this figure had appeared. He also did not know what this figure's existence was. The only thing he could be sure of was that its appearance was definitely related to his inability to leave this place. For some reason, Lu Feng did not feel the slightest bit of fear after seeing this strange scene in such a dangerous and unfamiliar place. He looked at the figure in front of him, filled with a kind of tranquility, a kind of incomparable tranquility. It was originally just a figure. This kind of thing that was similar to a person's shadow could not possibly open its mouth to speak. However, for some reason, Lu Feng felt that it could open its mouth. After being silent for a long time, there was still no reply. Lu Feng finally spoke again. "Do I know you? Or do you know me? Why do I feel an inexplicable sense of familiarity?" This was the real reason why Lu Feng was hesitant and confused. A sense of familiarity, it was a sense of familiarity. Facing this figure, Lu Feng felt a sense of familiarity. Although it was just a figure and he could not see anything, Lu Feng felt a sense of familiarity. This familiarity seemed to come from the depths of his soul, from the deepest part of his heart. At this moment, the figure shook slightly, proving that it could hear Lu Feng's words. Silence, it was incomparably silent. This time, it was no longer Lu Feng who broke the silence. Finally, a voice slowly came from the illusory figure. "Have you already forgotten?" Lu Feng was slightly taken aback. A moment later, his expression abruptly changed. Although this voice was filled with an incomparably dreamy and hazy feeling, it sounded so familiar to Lu Feng's ears. It was so familiar that it caused his soul to tremble. Without waiting for Lu Feng's response, the illusory figure finally opened its mouth once again. "Yes, you should have forgotten too. After all, it has been too long. Besides, you should not have known." The next moment, the figure gently waved its arm. Chapter 676. At this moment, heaven and earth changed. The entire space-time seemed to be flipped. Lu Feng was shocked. He could feel that the power contained in that light wave was incomprehensible. Was it powerful? No, it wasn't powerful. It couldn't be described as powerful. It was terrifying. It was truly invincible. With a light wave of the arm, the profoundness that overflowed in an instant seemed to make the entire universe tremble and change. Lu Feng had never heard of or felt such power before. With his current power of power, he could even crush a mid-level true god if he used all his strength. However, with a wave of the arm, he felt insignificant. It was an indescribable feeling that came from the bottom of his heart. Moreover, what shocked Lu Feng the most was that from the beginning to the end, the illusory figure had only moved its arm slightly. He had never done anything superfluous. In an instant, Lu Feng seemed to have thought of something. His pupils, which were looking at the illusory figure, were already infinitely enlarged and filled with a kind of world-shaking tremor. The surrounding space had completely changed. The ancient altar had disappeared, and Lu Feng appeared in an indescribable temple. Was it majestic? Perhaps it was. Was it huge? Perhaps it was. However, at this moment, the feeling that Lu Feng felt was not something that could be described as majestic or lofty. In the past, he had seen countless miracles and phenomena in the universe. It was already indescribable. The things that Lu Feng had seen were more terrifying than many of the Divine King's supreme existences. Not to mention the distant ones, just the sky-piercing Futu in his own consciousness space was already indescribably great. It was an existence that surpassed all the miracles and miracles. However, he, who had seen so much, thought that he wouldn't be shocked when he saw any buildings with miracles. At this moment, he was once again stunned. Lu Feng wasn't shocked because of the existence of this place. He was shocked because of the existence that was quietly displayed here. This is what this ancient and majestic temple was so old, as if it had experienced the baptism of endless time and space, as if it was engraved with the accumulation of time and history. It stood there quietly. There were no luxurious decorations in its palace, not even the slightest bit of decoration. However, the things that quietly existed within it caused Lu Feng to be dumbfounded. Those were countless shrines. They were densely packed and piled up, covering the entire hall of the temple. There were items of all sizes, and they were all quietly displayed, filling up the entire hall. At this moment, Lu Feng felt a sense of narrowness. In this endlessly vast temple, there weren't many altars. Even so, the endless number of altars still filled the entire space completely. An indescribably solemn atmosphere reverberated through the temple. It was abundant, and it constantly fluctuated, affecting Lu Feng's heart. At this moment, looking at those altars, Lu Feng was dumbfounded and at a loss. In the next instant, his feet moved slowly. He actually couldn't help but slowly walk towards the temple, towards those altars. The illusory figure stood behind Lu Feng, still expressionless. He only quietly watched as Lu Feng walked over step by step. At this moment, Lu Feng's mind was completely blank. He couldn't remember anything else. His eyes were only lifeless and at a loss. However, his body was completely out of his control. Closer, closer. Closer, 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 closer. Closer. Finally, Lu Feng arrived in front of them, in front of the countless altars. His eyes were still at a loss. However, in the depths of this loss, there was an unconcealable sadness. It was a kind of indifferent sadness. It was a kind of crazy sadness. It was a kind of regretful sadness. In his eyes, tears flashed, overflowed, wetted, and dripped down. Everything happened so quietly yet so powerfully. It made one's heart tremble, made one's soul grieve, and made one's life magnificent. Lu Feng didn't understand. He really didn't understand. He didn't know why he would have such a feeling. Why would he have such a crazy and involuntary reaction when he saw those altars? He really didn't know. In this life, I bear the fate of billions of years, and I will never retreat. Vaguely, Lu Feng saw a figure bearing billions of years, carrying reincarnation on his back. He unsheathed his sword, his white hair fluttering, and his immortal aura lingering around him. This was the era of invincibility. Although his body was already covered with countless cracks and filled with endless blood, his eyes were still filled with unwavering radiance. Countless crystals flowed out of his mouth. His shoulders were already flattened by innumerable tribulations. His body was pierced with countless wounds. He was still fighting. He would never retreat. He would never regret even if he died. The glory of us immortals will never wither. Our faith will never crumble. Let's fight, let's fight. I will give up my endless prosperous fate, give up my unyielding soul, and tremble my body that condenses faith. This battle will elevate me to the extreme. This battle was the final battle. It was the battle to elevate him, the final battle. He was willing to give up everything. For the final hope, for the greater glory, he was willing to burn everything. Scene after scene, Tao after Tao, again and again. Countless memories flashed past Lu Feng's eyes, his heart, and his soul. Lu Feng had never imagined that there would be a moment like today. He would be shocked, in pain, and in tears because of some people, some existences that he had never seen before. Finally, Lu Feng stopped watching. He really couldn't watch anymore. The trembling of his soul was already unbearable for Lu Feng. The scenes in front of him were so familiar. However, no matter how much Lu Feng tried to imagine and recall, he couldn't think of it. He couldn't see it at all. His heart was very painful at this moment. It was so painful that it penetrated his heart. Vaguely, Lu Feng felt that he had lost a lot of precious things. A lot of precious things that he would never forget. However, no matter how hard he tried, no matter how crazy he was, he still couldn't remember anything. Not even a little bit. This kind of feeling made him unable to continue. It made him unable to persevere. Therefore, he gave up. He really couldn't watch anymore. Standing quietly in the ancient temple, Lu Feng stretched out his hand and gently wiped away the tears on his cheek. The confusion in his eyes gradually disappeared. That faint madness also gradually extinguished. Lu Feng was so silent at this moment. He didn't say anything. He could only stand there quietly, unable to say anything. After a long time, that figure finally came to Lu Feng's side. He looked at Lu Feng and still didn't say anything. At this moment, Lu Feng turned around and looked at the figure. His eyes had already recovered their usual calm and tranquil expression. Slowly, Lu Feng opened his mouth. "Do you know of my existence?" The figure was silent. He didn't say anything. In the end, he nodded gently. However, a moment later, he shook his head slightly. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng fell silent, once again falling into an endless silence. This time, after an endless period of time, Lu Feng spoke again. "Am I really reborn?" Lu Feng really doubted it. He really doubted that he was reborn. At this moment, when he saw the countless altars, the scenes, and the ancient memories, Lu Feng still asked even though he couldn't believe it and didn't want to believe it. Because of everything, because of the heavenly Futu, because of his inexplicable memories, because of the endless nobility of his fate, he had no choice but to believe it. The figure was silent. However, it didn't stay silent for too long this time. He finally spoke for the second time. "Reincarnation? Rebirth? That really exists. However, it's really too difficult to achieve that step. Too difficult. It really exists. Then it really exists. Perhaps it's really difficult to achieve that." At least, Lu Feng already knew that even the overlords of this era couldn't do it. However, he was different. His fate was so noble. His current life was so heaven-defying. If that's the case, he must have been an invincible existence of an era. He might even have been a supreme ruler. If that's the case, it's possible for him to be reborn. Looking at Lu Feng, the figure took the initiative to speak for the first time. In the past, he was incomparably great. He was truly an invincible existence. He surpassed all invincible existences, however, he failed. In that greatest era, all of the existences fell with his failure. Lu Feng didn't say anything. However, his heart kept trembling. If he didn't see that, perhaps Lu Feng wouldn't have known or doubted it. However, after seeing so much, he finally understood what the illusory figure meant by those words. "The greatest era you're talking about is the truly greatest era, right? It's that, the primitive immortal devil era, Only the primitive immortal devil era could be called the greatest era. The figure sighed. Although there were no emotions mixed in it, Lu Feng could hear a strong helplessness, a kind of sigh. Yes, he was the greatest existence in the immortal era. In the future, it's called the primitive immortal devil era. His birth, his rise, the traces of his existence have been buried by the passage of time. His greatness covered everything. Even history didn't have the qualifications to engrave him. Even time didn't have the qualifications to remember him. Any living thing that saw him didn't have the qualifications to look up to him. They didn't have the qualifications to remember his appearance. They didn't have the qualifications to remember his existence. Even if they were immortals, at this moment, Lu Feng was trembling. He was trembling endlessly. They didn't even have the qualifications to look up to him. They didn't even have the qualifications to remember him. Then, what level of existence was he? Therefore, apart from the great existences in the immortal era, no one knew of his existence. Even if countless ordinary immortals had witnessed his glory, in the end, in the blink of an eye, they would forget about him. The figure turned around and glanced at the temple beside him. There were countless altars and memorial tablets in the temple. His image actually showed a trace of fluctuation. The living things in the future are all searching for the truth. That is the truth behind the extinction of the immortal era. They are searching for the whereabouts of those immortals. Then, at this moment, you should know one of them. Lu Feng turned around and glanced at the temple. He couldn't maintain the calmness in his eyes. Countless ripples fluctuated. He was silent. After a long time, he sighed. I understand, those immortals didn't disappear. They are all here, this shocking temple filled with countless altars. Those immortals are dead. All of them are dead. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.